All right, looks like we are live, guys, and I know everybody's excited. This is the much anticipated debate between myself and Bill Tavis. Tonight we are going to be debating, is all life related through common ancestry? So thank you to everybody in the chat. Looks like we've already got some super stickers coming in, super chats. Thank you so much, guys. This is definitely going to be one to remember. It's going to be exciting. I do want to give a reminder, though, because this week was busy. We had a ton of shows, and tonight's the main event. Next week, no break, though, because we're going to have John McKay, the creation guy, back with us tomorrow, followed by a couple more presentations Tuesday, Wednesday, and then we're going to have another big debate between Ron Garrett and Matt Slick. So that's going to be a lot of fun as well. And I want to quickly go over the format for the night, and then I'm going to bring in the debaters. Okay, guys? So this is going to be a very formal debate, very structured debate. We're having 13 to 15-minute opening statements. Then we're going to have a few rebuttal rounds. The first rebuttal round is going to be 8 minutes each. Second round is going to be another 8 minutes. Third round of rebuttals, 5 minutes. And then we're going to have 2 rounds of fast-paced responses. Okay, this way we can both do our best to address direct questions if need be with quicker responses. Those are going to be 2 minutes each. We're going to end with a 1-minute rebuttal and then concluding statements, followed by, as always, a 20-minute, roughly 15 to 20-minute audience Q&A. So we've got Praise with us today, who's going to be the moderator. So shoot him the questions. Don't tag me. I'll be focused on the debate. Make sure you are tagging Praise. Steadfast and easy. Thank you so much, brother, for the support. I appreciate it. God bless. So let's bring in the moderator and Bill Tavis. Bill, good to have you here. Praise, good to have you here.
Good to be here as well. Looking forward to moderating this, and yeah.
Awesome. I'm excited. I appreciate it. We've already got a good chat, so this is definitely going to be a fun one. Bill, I don't think you're a stranger to this channel in terms of comments, but you're a stranger in terms of this is your first appearance live in terms of live debate. So Bill, thank you so much for being here. This is going to be a lot of fun. And why don't you take a couple minutes to introduce yourself, break the ice, tell us who you are. Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Bill. My last name is Tavis. It's pronounced Tavis.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm an artist. I'm interested in biology and I'm interested in the Bible, but I wouldn't call myself an expert in either one. So what am I doing here, right? Well, I've been an artist for doing art all day, every day for like 17 or 18 years. Like that's all I do. I don't have a family or anything. So that is my area of expertise. And ultimately art is being a creator. And ultimately this discussion is about creation. I mean, this is a creationist channel. So that is my area of expertise that I'm bringing to the discussion. And if there's any atheists out there, I'm not going to be trying to convince you that God. I grew up atheist, but I'm Christian now, and I'm not going to be trying to convince any atheists out there that God exists. I'm just going to be going from the presupposition that God is true as the Bible describes God, so that me and Standing for Truth have some sort of common ground to start with. But I do hope to show the atheists that evolution is not a valid excuse to reject God or the Bible. And likewise, I hope to show the creationists that the Bible is not a valid excuse to reject evolution. And to tell you a little bit about how I got here, like I said, I grew up atheist. My parents didn't take me to church at all. But I grew up in the desert where lots of dinosaur fossils are found. And we had an excellent natural history museum. And I spent a ton of time there. I went on field trips there with my school, did camping trips with them. I had birthday parties there. I did workshops there. It was a big part of my life. And, when I was in elementary school and adults would ask me what I wanted to be when I would grow up, I would say, I want to be a paleontologist. Like, I just thought it was super cool. And later, when I actually had a biology class in school and I realized biology was all about remembering names, I quickly decided it was not for me because I'm terrible with names and memorizing names seemed like torture. So I eventually went into being an artist, but I still had my interest in life and in biology. And So my career for 10 years was a medical animator. What I did is I visualized micro and molecular biology. So as part of that job, I became familiar with reading really high level, really obtuse scientific research. It'd be like somebody was studying for 8 years, and then I had to visualize it. And a lot of those papers were really difficult. So that got me used to reading papers. So even though I'm a layman, I can handle reading scientific papers. So ultimately, that's going to be my standard of evidence for this debate. It's either got to be in the Bible or it's got to be in peer-reviewed literature. It was through creating the molecular biology world, through creating that in the computer, is what convinced me as an atheist that there had to be a creator God. Because here I was creating this stuff in the computer. And, in my school, we did a lot of artist study. That's how you learn. You copy other artists. And it was like I was copying the greatest artist ever. So I had to admit that that was there. But it was still 10 years after that I finally became a Christian, for lots of other reasons I don't have time to get into. But ultimately, the reason it took so long is because I had so much animosity against Christianity. And I think some of the things I heard from creationists when I was a kid, and just seeing all these fossils, innocently looking at all these fossils, the things I heard turned me against Christianity. And that's a large part of why I'm here today. So I think that's about it.
Okay, well, I appreciate that introduction, Bill. This is going to be exciting. My introduction, obviously, I'm no stranger to this channel because this is my channel. I have had about between 80 to 100 debates, roughly. I've kind of lost count, but it's definitely between there. And I especially love this topic of universal ancestry versus separate ancestry or independent origin. So I'm excited to see what Bill brings to the table in terms of evidence for universal ancestry. I'd be curious to see if it's going to be anything that maybe I haven't seen before. And it sounds like Bill's been at this for a while, so it's going to be. I'm excited for this one. This is going to be a lot of fun. I've written numerous books on this topic. I got a bunch behind me actually on my floating bookshelves. So yeah, that's pretty much my introduction. So why don't we waste no more time? We've got some super stickers coming in already, so people are excited. I'm excited. Ramen, thank you so much. This is going to be fun. Bill, I appreciate the introduction. Why don't we jump right into your opening statement? Bill, I will say this. If you do start lagging or anything in your webcam, I'll let you know because I want to make sure everything comes out smooth. It looks good so far.
Okay.
But I saw a couple little issues, but I think we'll be good. But I'll definitely keep you posted on technical stuff. So, Bill, why don't we hand it over to you? Praise, you're the moderator, brother, so I'm going to hand it over to you, and you guide us.
Okay.
Yes. So we're going to start with our first round of 13 to 15-minute openings. I'm going to give you guys a reminder, the 13-minute mark. So when you're ready to start, Bill, let me know, and on your first word, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I'm going to try to share my screen here. Okay, so I'll start by quoting Revelation 12:9, which talks about, "And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world." So I'm here to tell you that Satan deceives the whole world in everything, including with evolution. This idea that we somehow have to choose between creation and evolution, it's divisive and it causes strife. It's a lie from Satan. And I fell for that lie for a long time. I was on one side of that for a long time. But ultimately, what I had to realize is that evolution is just creation over time. That's all it is. So ultimately, the study of evolution glorifies God. Now, today we're going to be talking specifically about all life related by common ancestry. I'm going to say yes. Yes, it is. First, I'll quote from the Bible, Psalm 33:6. "By the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth." This isn't talking about life yet, but this is establishing that God creates from the breath of his mouth. Now, Ecclesiastes 3:19 is talking about animals and humans, and it says, "Yea, they have all one breath." So in the Bible, we have all of life related through this one breath that they share, and that one breath comes from a singular origin, which is God's mouth. There's not more than one God breathing this out. It's a singular origin. So that's in the spiritual language of the Bible. The scientific concept of common ancestry was introduced by Charles Darwin in 1859 when he said, all living things have much in common. I should infer from analogy that probably all the organic beings which have ever lived on this earth have descended from some one primordial form into which life was first breathed. So I know Darwin probably had some weird opinions about the church, but regardless, when he introduced the scientific concept, he said life is all related back to this one breath. And the Bible says that life is all related back to this one breath. There's no conflict. Here's some modern peer-reviewed literature that answers this question for us. They say it is common belief that all cellular life forms on Earth have a common origin. This view is supported by the universality of the genetic code and the universal conservation of multiple genes. Now, to be fair, I put this next part in here, to be fair, because science cannot be proven absolutely in most cases. So they say a formal demonstration of the universal common ancestry hypothesis has not been achieved and is unlikely to be feasible in principle. Nevertheless, they say the evidence in support of this hypothesis provided by comparative genomics is overwhelming. The alternative is convergent evolution. Several lines of evidence indicate that convergence is not a viable explanation. Convergent evolution is a virtual impossibility. So me as a layman, I can read peer-reviewed literature. Now, I'm not opposed to questioning science. I can identify areas of science where I think there's fraud being committed. But the burden of proof is on standing for truth to tell me why I, as a layman, should reject this common belief of science that is supported by overwhelming evidence in favor of something with evidence against it that is described as a virtual impossibility. Now, here's an image that shows how all of life is related through common ancestry. Another peer-reviewed paper says shared contingent features of all living things point to a single shared origin of all life. So the early diagrams like this, they're sometimes called phylogenies or a tree of life. The early diagrams were made by doing comparative anatomy studies. They would, for instance, look at the skeleton of various vertebrates. Most vertebrates share the same bones, the same exact body plan. It's just like different lengths and different proportions of bones. And we can group animals by how similar they are. And it forms a nested hierarchy of classification called the scientific taxonomy. So we have like animals, mammals, primates, etc. Okay. So now this is showing, and that hierarchy is formed by the process of evolution, and in the fossil record over time from the bottom towards the top, we can see the development of those body plans. Now, this is an artistic rendering on the left showing how all life is related. This is more of a scientific graph, but this is still the tree of life. Now, they don't attempt to, this is an unrooted tree. They don't attempt to identify which one of these came first, but it still shows all of life related by common ancestry. Now, whereas this image shows plants, animals, and fungi all related through common ancestry, plants, animals, and fungi are all constrained to that small green fan in the lower right of this image. Okay, that's all eukaryotes are right there. Next to that, you have archaea, and then that entire fan, taking up the entire top half, is all bacteria. So we've seen bacteria evolve. For instance, antibiotic resistance. Creationists will say, oh, that's not really evolution because the bacteria is still just a bacteria. It didn't turn into a tree. Well, here you see in visual form, this is exactly what science says about the evolution of bacteria. It never shows bacteria changing into anything else. It shows bacteria becoming an enormous diversity of bacterial forms. Now, that is because bacteria reproduces very rapidly. It has been around for a really long time, and it can live in just about any environment. So there's way more bacteria on this than there is eukaryotes. Now, the reason they were able to discern so many bacteria is because they were using molecular methods. If you're just using visual comparison, a lot of bacteria looks the same. Even earlier studies using molecular studies, they only used one protein. So they were like, oh, maybe it's a web of life and not a tree of life. What these researchers did is use, I'll quote them right here. They said, we aligned and concatenated a set of 16 ribosomal protein sequences from each organism. So using 16 proteins instead of just one gave them a much greater clarity of the data set. And the fact that they used 16 shows how rigorous this research was. That's a lot of organisms to collect 16 proteins from. And the fact that all of these organisms have those same proteins shows that they're all related. Now, this was published in Nature Microbiology, a major respected journal, and it was authored by 17 scientists from around the world working on this paper. So I need an excellent reason as a layman for why I should believe that this is fraud. Fraud is an accusation of a crime. I need evidence. Now I'm going to quote from the Bible again. Genesis 2:9 says, "The tree of life also in the midst of the garden." Okay. This paper that drew this scientific tree of life said, the tree of life is one of the most important organizing principles in biology. So the science says that the tree of life is central to biology. The Bible says that the tree of life is central to the garden. I don't see the conflict. Why do we have to insert a conflict here? Now, like I said in my intro, it was through studying molecular biology that I became convinced that there's a creator. On the right here, we have an ATP synthase. It's very similar to the type of stuff I'd be animating. And so, this has an axle that spins. It does mechanical work. And this, like I said, some of this stuff was hard to create in my animation program where I have ultimate control. Like this function, and it just had to look right. It didn't even have to function. Like this functions all day long in all of your trillions of cells without messing up. And it's formed and functions purely by just molecules bouncing into each other randomly. So the fact that that happens so consistently is truly remarkable. And Romans 1:20 puts this really well. It says, "For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." So yeah, I had no excuse as an atheist. I had to admit that this really did seem like it was created and designed. Now, Standing for Truth takes this one step further. This is a quote from one of his videos. He said, "Since we were made in the image of God, we should be able to get an idea, we should be able to get a sense for how he may have designed the biological world based on how we design things." I agree with that statement. I don't agree with how he's applying that statement because he's ignoring the fact that all human designs have evolved over time without exception. So if we're looking at how humans design things and we see that it evolved, and then we look at the biological world and it looks like it evolved because the fossil record clearly shows evolution, well, then why can't creationists say that God used evolution? I don't understand the disconnect here. Standing for Truth is going to need to explain that. And now, see, I'm an artist. Artists call it progression, not evolution. Like, oh, I progressed over time, or you can even see the whole progression of art over art history. Okay, but ultimately it is evolution. It's the diversification and change of forms through iteration. And this is not just my crazy opinion. Here's peer-reviewed literature noting the striking similarities between biological evolution and technological cultural evolution. It's something that cannot be avoided. Here on the bottom, I use this illustration to show you exactly what I'm talking about. This is the macro evolution of a telephone. On the left, that's a giant wooden box with brass bells and mechanical crank. It's got nothing to do with a smartphone, but you can see how over time, the telephone gradually changed to become a smartphone. That's evolution. So if we're looking at how humans create, like Standing for Truth said, if we're looking at how humans create things to get an idea of how God creates things, evolution is inseparable from that. Now, ultimately, the reason Standing for Truth is not going there with this analogy, the reason he's going to reject this peer-reviewed scientific research is because of the way that he thinks we should read the Bible. On the left here, we have Creation Ministries telling us how they think creationists should read the Bible. They say if we apply what they call the normal principles of biblical exegesis, ignoring pressure to make the text conform to the evolutionary prejudices of our age, it is overwhelmingly obvious that Genesis was meant to be taken in a straightforward, obvious sense as an authentic, literal, historical record of what actually happened. Now, I don't agree that Genesis is written in that way. I don't think that's obvious at all. And I think a talking snake seems like something figurative to me. And ultimately, this cartoon on the left is mocking the Bible. Okay, so when you read the Bible this way, it opens it up for mockery. I don't like that. Is it true that evolution is the only reason that you wouldn't read the Bible this way? No, that's not true. On the right, we have the earliest recorded Christian theology. This is from less than 200 years after Jesus Christ was crucified. Talking about Genesis and the Garden of Eden, he says, I do not suppose that anyone doubts that these things figuratively indicate certain mysteries, the history having taken place in appearance and not literally. So I do not think that Origen is the ultimate authority on how to read the Bible. He could be wrong. However, this does prove without a doubt that it was widespread in the church to read the Bible figuratively more than 1,000 years before evolution. So Creation Ministries is lying over here when they say that evolution is the only reason anybody wouldn't read it that way. Okay. Now, I'm new to Christianity. I just barely got baptized last August. So I'm like, I'm going to try to apply what Creation Ministries is saying. And when I try to read the Bible like that, I read about a firmament. The problem is that Creation Ministries says we live in a solar system. How did they arrive at a solar system? I don't know. Genesis 1:7 and 1:14 clearly describe a firmament, as we see on the left over here. There's the dome of the firmament holding back the water above. The sun, moon, and stars are inside the firmament. Even if you want to say, oh, the firmament is the atmosphere, in a solar system cosmology, the sun, moon, and stars are way outside of the atmosphere. They're not inside of it. Okay? Now, ultimately, the reason Creation Ministries is saying we have to read the Bible like this is because they want to use the bully language of, oh, it was 6 24-hour days, and if you say anything else, you're calling God a liar. Well, even when I read Genesis in a straightforward, literal manner, it says in Genesis 1:14 that the measurement of a human 24-hour day didn't even exist until creation day 4. That's when the sun, moon, and stars were placed in the firmament for signs and seasons and days and years. So seasons, days, years, those measurements didn't exist until creation day 4. So I don't arrive at 24-hour days, even when I try to read it the way they say I'm supposed to. And I do arrive at a firmament and not a solar system. So I have no idea where they're getting any of this stuff. And why am I talking about a firmament? Because it matters when it comes to human evolution and how we read Genesis 2:7. It says, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground. If we read this the way Creation Ministry says we should read it, we're stuck with the pagan understanding. As we see on the left, we see an Egyptian god Khnum sculpting man out of clay. We see in the middle, this is the Greek Prometheus sculpting man out of clay. Now, this was the common cultural understanding of the time.
2 minutes.
Okay. This is a common cultural understanding of the time. The Bible was not trying to reveal new information about what this process actually looked like. The Bible was explaining the important spiritual information that, hey, no, actually, this wasn't the lesser god of the Egyptian pantheon. This wasn't the Greek Titan that sculpted man. This was the one God Almighty, the same God that's created the entire universe that also personally sculpted man. Like, that's a huge change. That's what this verse is communicating. Now, since I read it as Origen suggested, as figuratively indicating certain mysteries, I have no problem with man being formed of the dust of the ground, indicating molecules to man evolution. And I can show you this further by cross-referencing other verses. Isaiah 64:8 and Job 10:9. I'll quote from 64:8. It says, O Lord, thou art our Father, we are the clay, and thou art potter, and we are all the work of thy hand. So humans in the present are referred to in the Bible as being sculpted out of clay by God. Now, if we take this literally, again, on the left, it brings mockery. But clearly, we know that God did not actually reach up inside our mom with hands and sculpt us out of clay. When we study gestation scientifically, we find out that it goes from a single cell and through a long, complex biological process of change over time, it eventually becomes a human. So if God as a sculptor of clay can be used as a metaphor for this biological transition of a single cell to a human, then this verse of God as a sculptor can also be a metaphor for a complex biological transition from a single cell to a human. I'm good. I got through everything.
All right, awesome. Praise. How
yeah,
looking?
I got DC'd. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, so yeah, your time's up. So we're going to hand it over to SFT now. I'm going to start the timer on his first word when you're ready to go, SFT.
Okay, let me share screen. Don't start the timer just yet.
Yeah, I know.
I'll let you know. Let me get everything here. Good to go. Praise, can you see the slideshow?
Yep, it's good to go.
All right, give me 1 second here. And you can start the timer now and give me that 2-minute warning as well at the 13-minute mark. So, okay, let's start this debate off with some very important verses that have incredible implications regarding our origins. I pointed out in the introduction that I've written numerous books on this topic, and after listening to Bill's opening, I'm really excited for this. So let's start off with some important verses. Genesis 1:26. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." Genesis 2:7, Genesis 2:27, also incredibly important, talking about the special creation of Adam and Eve. Genesis 3:20, and Adam called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. 1 Corinthians 15:45-47, the first man is of the earth. Earthly, the second man is the Lord from heaven. The first man, Adam, was made a living soul. Should we take this at face value? I'm here to tell you today that the scientific data corroborates the literal account of special creation in Genesis. I want to point out that this quote here from atheist Frank Zimler is exactly why the Genesis account of special creation is attacked. He said this during his debate with William Lane Craig. The most devastating thing, though, that biology did to Christianity was the discovery of biological evolution. Now that we know that Adam and Eve never were real people, the central myth of Christianity is destroyed. If there never was an Adam and Eve, there never was an original sin. If there never was an original sin, there is no need of salvation. If there is no need of salvation, there is no need of a savior. And I submit that puts Jesus, historical or otherwise, into the ranks of the unemployed. I think that evolution is absolutely the death knell of Christianity. Bill makes light of evolution. He says it's not important. But why is there such a high percentage of people who have left Christianity due to evolution? The Bible claims to be the history book of the universe. If Genesis is literal history, then that means Adam and Eve were real people. This also indicates that universal common ancestry is not true. Humans are not related to chimpanzees. Genesis is penned as a historical narrative, and the way it is written is indicative of literal history. There is not even a hint of ape to man evolution. The account of human origins is clearly an account of special creation. God created humans separate from the rest of the biological world. Romans 5:12, wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. Okay, let's get right into the evidence here, because I got to point out that it is incredibly important that Genesis be understood as literal history, because it is in Genesis where we learn that death is the penalty for sin. Death came into the world because of Adam's sin. This is exactly why we have death, decay, and suffering in the world today. Is there evidence for independent origins as well as the fall of man? The answer is yes. No evidence that Bill gave in his opening presentation, and I am going to touch on it all, in any way, shape, or form demonstrates universal common ancestry. The evidence is overwhelming for independent origins. Much of the evidence that confirms the Genesis account of origins also refutes the arguments that Bill presented in his opening statement. No, not all life is related through common ancestry. Let's talk about genetic degeneration. Now, in terms of genetics, what we have is a huge genome of 3 billion letters. We know that the mutation rate is extremely high. It's approximately 100 new mutations per person per generation. And it also turns out we have 3 new mutations every cell division in our body. This is astounding. Genetic entropy is the fact that most mutations are both slightly deleterious and selectable. And there are a huge number of papers that I am going to present here today where these population geneticists acknowledge the real problem of genetic degenerations. Most deleterious mutations have extremely small negative effects on fitness and thus are invisible to selection. If Bill wants to win the debate tonight, I certainly hope he has read through these papers. And these results have also been validated using biologically realistic numerical simulation paper after paper. The biggest names in biology all recognize genetic degeneration is true. And many have even named the genetic degradation problem, as you can see here on this slide. So these deleterious mutations, they build up in populations over time and result in genetic sickness and extinction. Mutations are essentially alterations in the DNA sequence. Harmful mutations vastly outweigh truly beneficial mutations, which means that harmful deleterious mutations are accumulating in the genomes of living organisms, and with beneficial mutations being so incredibly rare and most mutations being mostly deleterious, this means that large-scale evolution that Bill here is pushing tonight cannot be true. We're all more and more mutant every day. We are adding 3 new mutations per cell per day. All these mutations are coming in and they are having tiny effects. The next time somebody tells you that you don't look like yourself, tell them, of course not. This is the most mutant that I've ever been. Now, here's the thing. If you change one letter in a genome of 3 billion, you are not going to have a huge effect. The effect will be very small. It will be very subtle, but you've still lost a little bit of information. And if you don't stop this process, you're going to eventually destroy all the information. The majority of mutations are effectively neutral. This is agreed upon by population geneticists. It is not an invention by young Earth creationists, and Bill has to deal with this very real problem today. The typical mutation has too small of an effect on fitness to actually be measurable. Natural selection cannot see these mutations. They're virtually unselectable. Selection can, of course, act on the worst and most damaging mutations. We have some mutations where you can see an effect, of course, right? One letter change can often lead to disease. But the typical mutation is not detectable in any way. What type of mechanism can Bill present us with here today that can filter out so many new mutations that are pouring in to our genomes? As you can see here, the ultimate source of genetic variation for the evolutionists is mutations, because they reject the created heterozygosity hypothesis. And therefore, mutations build up over time and degenerate. This puts shelf lives on genomes and indicates that bacteria-like organisms did not evolve into biologists and pond scum did not evolve into people. I'm sorry, Bill. This is all perfectly consistent with the fall. Death, degeneration, and extinction is exactly what we predict as biblical creationists, and this is exactly what we find. We don't have to reinterpret scripture as Bill has done here today. We also have overwhelming evidence of limited ancestry based on genetic boundaries, which I'm going to get into in a second. But with the existence of polyconstrained DNA, I want to point out that this problem of genetic degeneration is even worse for the evolutionist. Most DNA sequences are polyfunctional and so must also be polyconstrained. This means that DNA sequences have meanings on several different levels, and each level of meaning limits the possible future change. For example, imagine a sentence which has a very specific message in its normal form, but with an equally coherent message when read backwards. Now, let's suppose that it also has a third message when reading every other letter, and a fourth message when a simple encryption program is used to translate it. Such a message would be polyfunctional and polyconstrained. We know that misspellings in a normal sentence will not normally improve the message, but at least this would be possible. However, a polyconstrained message is fascinating in that it cannot realistically be improved. It can only degenerate. Once again, this puts shelf lives on genomes. As you can see here, paper after paper acknowledging the near neutral mutation problem. Slightly deleterious mutations. Kimura talks about this over and over again. This is a very real problem. Right here, an important paper on the human germline mutation rate, 100 new mutations per person per generation, most of them being unselectable. We also have plenty of evidence for the widespread degradation of not only our genome, but there's paper upon paper going over the widespread degradation of the chimpanzee genome. We also have evidence in the fossil record, Homo floresiensis, Homo neanderthalensis, highly inbred, had a high genetic load, suffered from this mutational meltdown. Homo erectus, Homo naledi, suffered from reductive evolution. Reductive evolution is what we see. You're not going to take your fish to fisherman by losing information. Reductive evolution is not the answer for Bill. Paper here talks about the fast mutation rates in all of mammals. Paper after paper. When these evolutionists say there's no real evidence for genetic degeneration, they clearly do not know what they are talking about. We see it in bacteria, RNA viruses, we see it in humans, all forms of life. Here's one slide with 10 or 12 papers going over and demonstrating this data. And the best argument that they can look to, we'll see what Bill looks to, but junk DNA, mutation count mechanism, synergistic epistasis, truncation selection, it's all been looked at. It's all been looked at. And I'm excited to see what Bill's answer can be today. So when it comes to the genetic boundaries, we have recent studies that have revealed clear genetic boundaries and have demonstrated that most species today originated at the exact same time. How does someone like Bill from the position of universal common ancestry deal with this data? The fact that the pattern we see does not fit universal common ancestry. Right here, the Evo view is that there was a common ancestor way back, but the living organisms of today only show a pattern running back 100,000 years or so. Let's see if Bill can deal with this. So Bill today, and I'm just going to demolish his opening statement right here. So Bill today is arguing for universal common ancestry. Is all life related through common ancestry? Already we have seen that this cannot be the case. As most evolutionists do, Bill could argue from homology, which he did. He could argue from the rare so-called transitional forms. And of course, he could argue and look to nested hierarchical patterns, phylogeny, cladistics. This is exactly what he did. Typical talking points from the evolutionists. These groups within groups patterns that exist in the biological world. The problem for Bill is these lines of evidence are agnostic to the debate. Using these types of arguments to support universal common ancestry would be like looking to the sky and pointing out the fact that it's blue as a way to argue for evolution. This is what Bill spent his entire opening doing. He's failed already. This would be ridiculous since other models can also explain why the sky is blue or why the earth is round. The blueness of the sky or the roundness of the earth can both be explained by evolution or creation. Since we are made in the image of God, we might be able to get an idea into how God created based on the way we as humans design things. It turns out that human designers build in homologous patterns, design transitional-like vehicles. For example, this military amphibious assault vehicle. Also right here, we've got the Gladiator, Dodge Journey, Ford Flex. We also design in hierarchical patterns. This is not by accident. We're not doing this on purpose. As a matter of fact, even similar sequences between humans and chimpanzees exhibit amazing differences in terms of gene expression and epigenetics. Right here, Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins, a geneticist, points out that many similar genes between humans and chimps are expressed very differently, and the expression profiles bear no signs of selection or having evolved. How does Bill deal with this? We also have undeniable evidence that not all life is related through common ancestry using our Y chromosomes between humans and chimpanzees. They're incredibly different. Less than 35% when we consider overall gene content.
2-minute warning.
This was not predicted by the evolutionary community. We also have extremely low genetic diversity, which is exactly what we would predict from the biblical starting point of Adam and Eve. This would have restricted genetic diversity. This too was not predicted by the evolutionary community. As you can see here, major differences between the apes and humans. We also know that the chromosome 2 fusion here that the evolutionists look to has been completely overturned. We know that the fusion site appears to be a functional DNA element and essential to a human gene. You don't gain highly functional essential genes by slamming together 2 chromosomes. When it comes to abiogenesis, we got chicken and egg problems after chicken and egg problems. The best explanation in light of the massive failure of abiogenesis is design diversity, which explains all the data that Bill is looking to here today. We also know that pseudogenes, I want to get to some slides here, pseudogenes, vestigial organs, ERVs, junk DNA, it's all been overturned. The best lines of evidence that the evolutionists can look to, paper after paper, have all been demolished, better explained by the creationists, paper after paper. I know I'm flying through these here, but I just want to point out that it's not one or two. We could talk all day about the evidence for independent origins and the evidence against universal common ancestry. I'm going to yield there and get to some more lines of evidence later on in my rebuttal.
Awesome. Thank you for your opening statement. That was well said. Both of you guys had good opening statements. Now we're going to go into the next portion of the debate, and that is the rebuttal session. And you both get 8 minutes to rebut each other. And I'm going to give you guys a 1 minute warning before time. Let you guys know they have a minute to go. So I guess Bill's going to go first. When on your first word, the floor is yours.
Okay, so first you talked about Adam and Eve, and then you quoted an atheist. I know you're used to debating against atheists, but I'm not an atheist, okay? So the opinion of an atheist is irrelevant to this conversation. Adam and Eve are very real. Sin is very real. What happened in the garden is very real, okay? But as Oregon said, it's actually a deeply profound mystery, and the exact details are not expressed literally in the Bible. The Bible is giving us spiritual revelation. It's not giving us scientific data, and it's not a valid way to read the Bible. As I pointed out with the firmament, which you blocked me on your channel for bringing up in the comments, I hope you're willing to address that in the debate. He brought up, so many people have left because of evolution. I know. That's what I'm telling you. Okay? The position of creationists turned me off of Christianity for most of my life. I did fall into rebellion when I was a teenager, and I rejected Christianity for lots of other reasons. I don't know if I would have gone to it if it weren't for creationists, but they definitely were the seed of my antipathy towards Christianity. It's about time to take personal responsibility and stop blaming everybody else. Now, again, he tried claiming, Genesis is obviously a historical narrative, referring to chapters 1 through 3. You're going to have to back that up. I don't even think that genre existed when it was written. So good luck backing that up. Now, spent a lot of time speaking about entropy. So I want to share my screen here. I have these two graphs right here. Did I manage to share my screen? I don't think it's sharing.
No, I don't see your screen right now.
There it goes, maybe. Yeah, okay. So we have two different phylogenies here. The one on the left is for a Nokia phone. This is microevolution of Nokia. On the right, we have all of life. This was a paper that attempted to root the tree of life for all of life. You can see it forms the same pattern. It's a fractal. Fractal geometry is the geometry of nature. So you see the same pattern on different scales. Microevolution and macroevolution. The macroevolution biology paper says, in effect, rates of macroevolution are slower than rates of microevolution. So Standing for Truth is harping on mutation rates all the time. He hasn't addressed how macroevolution rates are slower. Most importantly, they say, the present studies demonstrate that the tree-like patterns of vertical descent of genes can be explained largely as an effect of broad variation in rates of gene loss. Okay, so losing information, all this, blah, 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 it doesn't do anything to dispel the science of evolution. That's what the science says. Here's a paper about entropy. Let me just quote from Ecclesiastes 3:20. It says, all go into one place, all are of the dust, and all turn to dust again. That is the entropy that affects everything. Okay, God forms us from the dust, and eventually we just break back down. But the idea that God is going to let all of nature just helplessly mutate into oblivion isn't consistent with the Bible. Nehemiah 9:6, I don't have it up there, but Nehemiah 9:6 says, Thou, even thou, are the Lord alone. Thou hast made heaven, the heaven of heavens, with all their hosts, the earth, and all that are therein, the seas, and all that is therein. So everything in the sky, everything on the land, everything in the ocean, God made all of it. And then it says, and thou preservest them all. If God is preserving all living things, it doesn't make sense that they're just helplessly, victims of entropy as God just sits back and does nothing. His argument, his allegedly scientific argument about genetic entropy denies the sovereignty of God. Now, here's some papers about entropy. They say growing complexity, however, is sculpted by entropic selection. The complex arrangements that flourish are those that survive the trimming imposed by entropy, the inevitable and relentless destruction of information. So entropy is, here, I'll quote the next one. Entropy, used here as a term for all forces that dismantle ordered structures, that includes the genetic entropy he's talking about. It acts as a selective force. Entropy is what selects things. Entropy selects for arrangements that resist it long enough to replicate and dismantles those that do not. Okay, now, again, he started talking about human designers building hierarchical patterns. I agree with him. Like I said, he needs to address why these patterns are the exact same as what we see in biology when we know that they evolved. Okay, on the left here, this is the caption for this image is the reconstructed tree of the evolutionary history of Nokia mobile devices. Okay. And they're talking about these different things, and they say this can be easily understood if we adopt the concept of the common ancestor. Here we have common ancestry applied to human creation. Okay. Here's another example. On the left, we have Indonesian batik. This is a type of fabric pattern, and this is a different way of visualizing a phylogenetic tree. They call it a phylomimetic because a meme is a cultural variation of a gene. Okay, they say the first important thing we can learn about through the phylomimetic tree is the visualization of creativity landscapes of Indonesian batik. Now, on the right, we have a biological tree of life for spiny-rayed fishes, which is like a huge amount of animals. It's like, I don't know, a fourth or a third or something of all the living species, a ton of animals. So if this one on the left is a visualization of creativity landscapes, the one on the right is also a visualization of creativity landscapes. This vast array of organisms shows the creativity of God. And this definitely shows that both human designs and biological designs evolve over time. The hierarchical structures of human designs is formed through its evolution. And then I also want to, mention that, I established in my introduction that peer-reviewed literature was my standard of evidence. Both of these papers are peer-reviewed literature. Now, Standing for Truth quoted from some peer-reviewed literature a couple times, but he did not. He pulled quotes out of context and used it to support something that the original authors do not support. And then the stuff that he quoted that actually does support what he's saying was not in peer-reviewed literature. That's just somebody's opinion. I'm a layman. I need some standard of quality before I'm going to trust a source.
1 minute.
Yeah, I guess we'll just touch on sin a little bit more because the Bible says that sin comes from our flesh. So evolution actually elucidates why that's the case. Okay, our sin comes from our flesh because we inherited all of these powerful desires, these animal instincts from evolution. But then in the Garden of Eden, we opened our eyes. All of a sudden, we can no longer act blindly on these instincts like animals do. All of a sudden, we bear this responsibility. And not only that, we can act out on them in terrible ways that animals could never dream of. So evolution just strengthens the case of sin. The fact that our reptile brain is rooted at the base of our brain, and that's where the worst sin comes from. That's why we're slaves to it. That's why we can't escape for it. That paints the need for Jesus Christ as our Savior from sin. I'm good with that.
Time. Yeah, you're just right under the 8-minute mark. So thank you for your rebuttal. Now it's SFT's turn for his rebuttal. And whenever you're ready, SFT, I'll start the timer.
All righty. Well, this is going to be a lot of fun. So Bill did not address anything and has not rebutted the arguments I put forth, destroying his position. Taking a literal approach to Scripture does not mean that we cannot recognize symbolisms, imagery, and so on, okay? Context is key. This is not looking good for Bill. I'm sorry. So this is going to be a lot of fun. He's looking more to Scripture than to science. He is failing miserably at his burden of proof today. This is not looking good. His argument against genetic degeneration is it's not consistent with God. Ouch. Again, I'm going to say this is not good for Bill. Bill, you've been trolling my channel for how many months and still have no answer, okay? Bill does not understand that genetic entropy doesn't have anything to do with thermodynamic entropy. Think degeneration then, Bill, and please try harder next rebuttal, okay? Because, try harder next rebuttal. Recognize that, okay? First off, I would love to know why a huge percentage of people leave Christianity or their faith is hurt over evolution if evolution does not matter. I personally came to Christianity when I realized universal ancestry was a fraud, and this idea that apples and whales are related is not what the scientific data says. Okay, Bill reinterprets the plain reading of scripture. That's what he spent a lot of time doing. But tonight, Bill must not understand that his burden of proof is to demonstrate whether or not all life is related through common ancestry. His biblical semantics are giving me a headache, but they're not going to win him tonight's debate. My interpretation, taking Genesis as a historical narrative, is, guess what? Consistent and corroborated by the empirical scientific data that Bill was not able to address today so far. Bill said evolution is just creation over time, okay? I've got so many notes here. I wish I had an 8-hour rebuttal instead of an 8-minute rebuttal, okay? This could not be further from the truth. This also depends on what you mean by evolution. The word evolution is slippery. Both evolutionists and creationists do not deny, I should say, change over time or change in allele frequencies in populations over time. But what we see in terms of evolutionary mechanisms are limited in explaining the entirety of biodiversity on the planet today, which, by the way, Bill has to explain. He's failing his burden of proof. Mutations are the destroyer and not the creator. God creates perfect. And it is because of man's sin that we have gone downhill. And this is what we see in our genetics. This is what we see in the universe. Mutations degrade genetic functionality. But yet Bill wants to look to mutations, which are destruction and not construction, as a way to take his fish to fishermen or his pond scum to people. Bill, you got to do better. Mutations or typographical errors in a text do not reflect God's original creation. God does not make mistakes, Bill. Bill talked a lot about phylogeny, cladistics, and nested hierarchies. These are all agnostic to the debate. Bill said hierarchies are formed through ancestry. This is not true. Bill's clearly new at this. Phylogeny requires many assumptions. First off, and I've got paper after paper that I could share screen on, they admit that they first assume there is a tree, and then they go into it looking for the data to categorize animals based on features, traits, shared derived synapomorphies, okay? And it turns out there are so many contradictions to this so-called phylogenetic tree of life that Bill spent so much time showing up on screen and clearly not understanding. A couple of these inconsistencies are convergent evolution, loss of traits evolution. We also see stasis in the fossil record, not forward change. Evolutionary mechanisms cannot explain the origin of novel phenotypic complexity, the origin of body plans. We also have incomplete lineage sorting, okay? Where depending on what gene you focus on, you get totally different trees. Let's say we tested the cytochrome C or the cytochrome B. Okay, let's say we looked at these different proteins, we would get totally different inconsistent trees to what Bill is purporting today. These are all contradictions to Bill's phylogenetic tree arguments. All of his arguments fail. Similar proteins he talks about demonstrate shared function, shared purpose, not shared ancestry. This is why function is key. And the fact that we have a genome of near fully function means that this genetic degeneration problem is even that much more worse for Bill. It puts shelf lives on genomes. Bill, deal with it. Quit dodging, okay? Bill talked about bacteria. We know from Lenski's experiment that bacteria populations experience what is called reductive evolution. We never observe any real forward evolution. We observe loss of traits, loss of function. We see in these long-term bacterial experiments, we see what's called adaptive degeneration. They're losing genes short-term, but it's long-term degeneration, okay? Bill, you need to update yourself on the data. You're arguing from 50 years ago. This is all in line with the biblical fall, which introduced mutations and extinction, which you want to deny, which means you have no explanation for mutations. You obviously don't understand that mutations lead to disease. We have thousands and thousands of new diseases entering the genetic database every single year. How do you account for this according to your model and according to your biblical butchering of the text? You're not going to take your bacteria-like organism into a biologist through loss of information and degradation of information. Yeah, human designs evolve over time, Bill, as we are limited. God is infinite. He creates perfectly. He creates animals. Guess what? With the ability to reproduce. Imagine if we could do that. Imagine if we could do that. No, we're in the infancy of understanding design, Bill. Quit straw manning. Okay, you've been at this for months, and this is the best you could come up with. And it's sad. It's laughable. I don't want to be mean, but it's sad. The DNA code is more complicated than the most complex computer on the planet. We write books, Bill, that can be read both forwards. Well, with books, we can read them forwards, but DNA can be read both forwards and backwards. It's information compression on the highest level. Humans create imperfectly. Okay. This is why I say we can get a sense, Bill, we can get a sense for how God designed the biological world. And it just so turns out that we build in hierarchical patterns, transitional like forms, homologous patterns. This is how we build. And this is also what we see in the biological world. These lines of evidence are agnostic to the debate. Okay. Another thing when it comes to the scripture, well, days will exist in the next life. Okay, in the new heaven and the new earth. We will be sustained not by a sun, but by God's light. How do you explain that? When we read Genesis and the days of creation as literal, okay, we can do this without any problems. And God sustained with his own light before the sun and moon were created. This was a great way to not get people to worship the sun. Macroevolution is a slow process, Bill says. Yes, time is your God. Time is the hero of the plot for Bill. But guess what? Deleterious mutation accumulation and mutation rates in general in the mitochondrial DNA, the Y chromosome. 1 minute? Okay. The Y chromosome puts shelf lives on genomes. Bill, how do you explain the incredible dissimilarity between human and chimpanzee Y chromosome? Less than 35% dissimilar. Answer that. Answer genetic degeneration. Why can we build these mitochondrial DNA phylogenetic trees? And we can see that we all came from one woman just a few thousand years ago. Same with the Y chromosome. Okay, time is actually the enemy of the plot for you. You don't have large-scale evolution since mutation accumulation puts shelf lives on genomes. Okay, you have inconsistencies with your phylogenetic trees, with your cladistics. You make evolutionary-based assumptions. I've got so much more to say. I think I've only got a couple seconds left. So let's hand it back to Bill and let's have him try again because so far it is an epic fail. Go ahead, Bill.
So that concludes our first round of rebuttals. We'll go into the second round now. So, Bill, on your first word, we'll start the timer. It's going to be 8 minutes as well. So go ahead.
Sure, yeah. I'd like to make my case without resorting to petty insults like, oh, epic fail, dude. I'll start off with, he basically thinks, it's just totally arbitrary in the Bible if you're going to take something super literally or totally arbitrarily metaphor. Like, in the same chapter, a day has to be 24 hours, but that firmament, that's just loose metaphorical poetry, okay? It's totally inconsistent. That's not a valid exegesis. He needs to answer to the firmament. He totally avoided it. Like when I read Genesis in the plain, straightforward way, it talks about a firmament holding back actual water. And then in Noah's flood, the windows of heaven were opened up and let some of that water through. So if you're going to be super ultra literal about Genesis, you have to have a firmament. The Hebrew word for firmament, rakia, does not have any wiggle room. The word for day, yom, just means an arbitrary length of time. The word rakia does not have wiggle room like that. It's a firm, solid boundary, no matter what. Now, he then goes on to talk about science. I'm going to try to share my screen again here. His claim was that that apples in Wales is not what the scientific data says. That's his claim. Okay. Here I have a picture of the scientific data. This isn't from 50 years ago. This is from 5 years ago, 2016, by 17 international scientists. This is the data. Apples and whales are both in that small green fan in the lower right, which is where eukaryotes are. And then he goes on, you get different trees from different proteins. Yeah, that's why they used 16 proteins, so that if any one protein is throwing it off, in average, you get a highly resolved image. It's basically anti-aliasing the data. Okay? Now, he talked a lot about mutations, and he just totally ignored what I quoted already, which is that talking about this tree of life on the right of all of life, which, by the way, bacteria is on the top and eukaryotes are on the bottom. Eukaryotes are not from bacteria, okay? Again, they say the tree-like pattern of vertical descent of genes can be explained largely as an affect of broad variations in rates of gene loss. So gene loss does not go against evolution. He talked about DNA as information compression. I agree with that. The thing is that with information compression is that, when every time a cell divides, all cells contain a complete copy of the DNA. So anytime a cell divides, it has to completely copy that entire strand of information without messing it up. So yeah, it's information compression. You want that data to be as small as possible. So if you're not constantly losing genes, you're going to wind up with information bloat. You're going to wind up copying more than is necessary, and then you'll wind up with more mistakes. So nothing about what he's saying about entropy goes against evolution. I'm going to quote more from this paper, which is specifically, this paper is called "The Evolution of Universal Adaptations of Life is Driven by Universal Properties of Matter, Energy, Entropy, and Interaction." And this is not just talking about entropy in the thermodynamical sense, whatever. It says, again, I quoted this already, entropy used here as a term for all forces that dismantle ordered structures. Since he affirms that DNA is an ordered structure, genetic entropy falls into this. Okay? It says all creatures in any system, any environment have to deal with entropy. Therefore, adaptations that restrain entropy are ubiquitous in living systems. And this makes evolution more about cooperation than this sort of kill or be killed struggle, as it was often thought of before. They say cooperation retards entropy. Cooperative interactions prolong the survival of DNA. Diversification, okay, that's what we saw with the bacteria, right? We saw broad diversification. Diversification, rather than uniform optimization, characterizes living things. Polydetermination extends diversification and retards entropy. Sexual reproduction maintains the continuous diversification of species. So, he's calling all these mutations deleterious. He doesn't know that. I got up on my other screen over here, 1 Thessalonians 15, from the King James Bible of 1611, the original King James. It says, "For our gospel came not unto you in word only, but unto is spelled VNTO, and only is spelled ONELY. So in modern King James, unto is spelled UNTO. That was a mutation. And then only is spelled ONLY. That was a deletion. But even with one mutation and one deletion, this strand of information is the same information. It's just actually more compact. It's more compressed. So I don't see what the problem is with the entropy. And ultimately, he's harping on all of these high-level genetic concepts because he wants to avoid fossils. Okay? Fossils show that Noah's flood cannot possibly explain the extent of fossils. This on the right is a fossil find, an enormous fossil find that was buried by a sandstorm in the desert. Okay, a sandstorm cannot be accounted for by a flood, obviously. Here we see the Colorado Plateau. Halfway up, we got footprints. Now, if all of the hundreds or thousands of feet of sediment below that were already deposited by a flood washing across the entire continent, where did that creature come from to leave the footprints? And on what dry land did it leave them? Because obviously the flood wasn't done yet. It's depositing thousands more feet on top of it. Okay, and then that's, the first one is down here in the Supai Formation. You go up to the, the Kayenla and some other one formation. We got dinosaur footprints. These ones down lower, these aren't dinosaur footprints because you won't ever find a dinosaur in these lower layers, ever. They're sorted vertically. But halfway up, we got dinosaur footprints. Where did those dinosaurs come from? The flood already washed over like how many times now to deposit all that? Where did those dinosaurs come from to leave those footprints? And then even above that, we got dinosaur eggs. This flood's been going back and forth across the entire continent like 20 times now. And you're telling me there's intact eggs? No. No. There's obviously a large passage of time in between all of these events with different ecosystems occupying the same space on the earth. Okay.
1 minute.
We got the favorite creationist fossil, polystrate fossils is what they call it. But here we have an actual paper about them, actual peer-reviewed paper. They're called T-knot assemblages. On the left, we have arrows indicate tidal rhythmites. The whole succession was deposited in only a few months. So yes, it was deposited rapidly, but tidal rhythmites are not the same thing as a giant flood washing across. And here we see fossil stumps. Okay, here Creation Ministry says, oh, it's not possible that polystrate fossils were buried gradually because the top part of any tree would have rotted away. That's exactly what we see here. The base of it was buried rapidly. You can see in the diagram on the left, on the bottom, those stumps, they were exposed past a certain layer, they eroded, then more sediment was deposited on top of them in different types. And then on the far left, you can see that above that, there was another tree that the same thing happened to. And these trees are rooted in place. They're already rooted in sediment that's already there. Okay.
You wrap it up. Do you have something to wrap up there, Bill, or are you done?
They're rooted in sediment that's already there, and there's clearly been a passage of time in between these layers because the top part of the tree is missing.
Okay. So SFT, your second round of rebuttals is ready to go. Whenever your first word, I'll start the timer.
Awesome. Okay, I appreciate that praise. So once again, and I think the audience can see it as well, Bill doesn't understand his burden of proof today. Okay, he avoids the science. He avoids praise. Can you mute? Actually, Bill, just mute yourself while I'm talking. He avoids my argument and then goes back to the scripture. This isn't a scriptural debate. Bill, you have failed. It's over. I'm sorry. Your phylogenetic tree is evolution to prove evolution. Okay, you can read these papers and you can read all about the inferences being made and how they assume the phylogenetic tree when they are building in the data. Okay, you don't understand mutation accumulation. I showed dozens and dozens of quotes and papers that you're glossing over. Okay, maybe we should take a break and you can go Google some answers to this problem that destroys your position. The use of the word rakia depends on the context, and in the context of creation in Genesis, it appears to refer to an expanse or the atmosphere. No, the Bible does not in any way imply that we are covered by a solid dome. That doesn't matter, though. Today's burden of proof is on Bill to demonstrate that whales, pine trees, strawberries, and monkeys are related through common ancestry. No, we know the genetics puts shelf lives on genomes. He's failed his burden of proof. He went to the fossil record, Noah's flood. He's all over the place. He's all over the place. Bill doesn't get mutation rates. I'm going to share a screen in a second to give Bill a free lesson here on mutation rates. But first, I'd like to point out that he agreed with information compression. He agreed that the genome is multidimensional, nested with overlapping codes. Okay, maybe he agrees that the junk DNA paradigm has been overturned. I'd like to hear him answer that later. Do you, Bill, believe that the junk DNA paradigm has been overturned? Do you agree with the evidence that suggests we have massive genome-wide functionality in terms of these DNA elements like pseudogenes, endogenous retroviruses, ALU sequences? I must have showed 20, 30 papers in my opening. So I'd like to see if you agree with that, because if you do, it puts you between a rock and a hard place, because it turns out that more of these mutations that are accumulating are deleterious. Bill said that. How do we know that they're deleterious? Oh, maybe all the population geneticists, maybe all the number of quotes that I showed in my opening statement where they pointed out that no mutation can truly be neutral, as they must all have some effect on fitness. They all must have some effect on genotype. And since they're only slightly deleterious, guess what? Natural selection can't see them. They're subject to genetic drift and they degenerate over time. Bill, you don't have billions of years. Okay, time is not the hero of the plot. You can have billions of years, but guess what? All you're going to have is more genetic degeneration, more extinction, and no macroevolution that you want people to believe occurred in the past today. Okay? The mitochondrial DNA compartment that we only get from our mother, it picks up a mutation about every other generation. When we build these phylogenetic trees or family trees, we can look at mitochondrial DNA diversity worldwide, and we can see how far apart people are, okay, on this tree. And with the fast mutation rate, Eve, the mother of us all, existed only a few thousand years ago. And this actually leads to testable predictions on the history of civilization, leads to testable predictions on mutation rates. I'm going to ask Bill, what testable predictions can you make? And you still have not answered the genetic degeneration problem, why the Y chromosome in the chimpanzee and human is so incredibly dissimilar. You haven't addressed the mitochondrial DNA data. Mitochondrial DNA worldwide has incredibly low genetic diversity. How do you explain this according to your model of deep time evolution? The Y chromosome, it's also fast, picks up about one mutation every generation. There are only a few hundred mutations separating people worldwide. And our last Y chromosomal ancestor, being Noah, existed just 4,500 years ago. This is all consistent with universal common ancestry. As you can see here, guys, we don't have to go to Bill's butchering of the text. We can take the straightforward reading of the Bible, as I indicated in my opening statement, with the passages suggesting the special creation of Adam and Eve, death, extinction as a result of the fall, and all the scientific data corroborates that. But Bill's butchering of the text, why he keeps going to scripture, is beyond me today. He's not demonstrating that all life is related, but guess what? His interpretation of the scripture is inconsistent and is not corroborated by the scientific data, which is why he fails both scripturally and scientifically. I want to point out as well, Dr. John Sanford and colleagues, they've developed a massive computer program called Mendel's Accountant. Okay, it's actually the most sophisticated evolutionary modeling system ever written. You can literally take any mutation rate you want, any mutation distribution, population size, all these different parameters you can apply to these artificial populations, okay? We can then allow it to run its course. We can then look to natural selection, and we find out over and over and over again that with any realistic set of parameters, evolution does not work. It's been falsified. Okay, Bill is holding on to pseudoscience that's been falsified. For whatever reason, I don't know. Genetic degeneration is inevitable. All of these rescue devices that he could look to, which I still don't think he understands the problem, which is weird because I was asking him questions months ago in a live chat where he admitted he had no answer, and it's been months later and he still has no answer. These rescue devices, truncation, selection, mutation count mechanisms, synergistic epistasis, super beneficial mutation, trade-offs, you name it, whatever Bill could look to. They've all been looked at, analyzed, and published, and they all fail. They all have been falsified. I want to share screen real quick. Praise, if you could just pause my timer while I do this.
Yeah, yep.
Okay, here we go.
You got 2 minutes when it starts up, yeah.
I'll tell you when, just 1 second. Okay. I've got 2 minutes.
Yep.
Okay. So we've got two trees here. I want Bill to actually deal with the data for once. He's dodging, he's dipping, he goes to the fossil records, Noah's flood. I'll deal with that in a bit. But I want him to at least attempt his burden of proof here, which he's failing, okay? So this is a mitochondrial DNA tree, and this is a Y chromosome phylogenetic tree. Now, Dr. Robert Carter, actually, he's taken all the Y chromosomes in the world, and he's made a Y chromosome family tree. And this tree is incredible because it's exactly what we would expect if independent origins were true. There's only a few mutations here, okay? It's explosive growth from a center point, which is exactly what we see here in the mitochondrial DNA. This is not hundreds of thousands of mutations. This is only a few mutations in the mitochondrial DNA and the Y chromosome. In the mitochondrial DNA, once again, explosive growth from a center point, all coming from Eve. Okay, mutation rates are fast. We also, you'll notice that some of these branches, okay, take the HVR haplogroup in the mitochondrial phylogeny, you'll see that people are picking up more mutations in the same amount of time. That breaks the evolutionary assumptions of the molecular clock. They can't now look at the chimpanzee and human genetic differences. We also know fixation rates are incredibly slow. And we also know that the chimpanzee genome is only about 88% similar to humans. So how does Bill fixate so many mutations? That's like 300 million DNA differences that he needs to fixate in that amount of time since the split. So what we're seeing here is a reflection of DNA differences and mutation rates over time. The length of the branches break the molecular clock. We're only looking at a few hundred mutations max in the Y chromosome, a few mutations in the mitochondrial DNA, all perfectly consistent with the special creation of Adam and Eve, leads to testable predictions in terms of the history of civilization in these subgroups. And I really want to see
wrap it up.
Bill deal with it, because he's got a lot of questions that he needs to answer, and I yield.
Awesome. So that concludes our rebuttal session. Now we're going to transition into 5-minute rebuttals. And when you're ready, Bill, I think you're on mute. Make sure you unmute yourself.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I'll start with mutations. I'm going to share my screen here. He's arguing against a straw man. I never said that random blind mutations are the source of evolution. Okay, here's peer-reviewed literature saying this from 2018. This is very recent. This is saying a central challenge in evolutionary biology concerns the mechanisms by which complex adaptations arise. They say what looks like an optimal organism design may not be attainable by a series of adaptive mutations. So I don't care that that's not possible. That doesn't disprove that evolution happened. The question is how evolution happened, not if it happened. Here I have some Bible verses just establishing that God is creative. O Lord, how manifold are thy works. In wisdom hast thou made them all. The earth is full of thy riches. Now, here's where it gets interesting. In the applied sciences, where the rubber meets the road, it either works or it doesn't. They don't care about this debate. They just care if it works. Okay. And in this paper, where they use biomimetic and evolutionary design-driven innovation and sustainable product development, they say in the evolutionary design process, creativity determines the mutation of an object shape. So in biological evolution, if random blind mutations aren't able to account for what we see in the fossil record, then it glorifies God and shows God's creativity. It does not just magically make that fossil record disappear like Standing for Truth wishes it would. He needs to answer to fossils, because fossils is where this entire idea came from to begin with. Darwin was not looking at genetic mutation rates. He was not looking at comparative genomics. He was looking at fossils and the anatomy of current extant species. Okay, the fact that modern genetic research has confirmed what Darwin found gives a whole lot of strength to it. Now, about the rakia, here, this is an illustration from Martin Luther's Bible translation, all the way up to 1557. People saw a dome. Look, there's a dome around the world. The earth, moon, and stars are inside the dome, and the water is outside of it. Martin Luther said the stars are fixed to the firmament. Okay, St. Augustine said that it constitutes an impassable boundary between the waters above and the waters below. Some scholarly research says only by taking Genesis 1 out of its historical context could one say that rakia means merely an atmospheric expanse. Now, rakia comes from the verb raka, which means to hammer something out flat. So if you hammer metal, you're expanding it outward, but that does not in any way imply a volumetric diffuse expanse. Okay, they say we ought then on both biblical and hermeneutical grounds to interpret the nature of rakia in Genesis 1 by the clear definition of rakia, which we have in Ezekiel 1, which suggests solidity in the first place, and no usage of rakia anywhere states or even implies that it was not a solid object. The historical meaning of rakia, so far from being overthrown by the grammatical evidence, is confirmed by it. The historical grammatical meaning of rakia in Genesis 1, 6-8 is very clearly a literally solid firmament. So if he wants to say, oh, he's not taking the straightforward reading, how is he getting the solar system out of it? I do not understand. Now, he also claimed, again, that scientific data goes against common ancestry. We're looking at the scientific data right here. Okay? There's no published peer-reviewed scientific data that goes against common ancestry. I looked. It's not there. His claim that it's been falsified is false. Science is open to falsification. It happens all the time that something will be corrected in the peer-reviewed literature. If somebody has a contradiction and they can't get it in the peer-reviewed literature, it's not legitimate. Okay, and then he's also ignoring punctuated equilibrium, because in punctuated equilibrium,
1 minute.
Okay, I don't know where I'm punctuated. I'll talk about this because I can't find my slide. This is the same chart he had, right? He's like, oh, it's a burst coming from the middle, so it must be that it does nothing before that, but that's not how it works. It's a fractal. This is a tip of a tip of a tip of this same graph right here, and you can say it's the same pattern. Fractals repeat over various scales. Okay, this one right here of the fish on the right, that's coming from a central point. They identified the common ancestor, but they say this phylogeny provides resolution for what has classically been referred to as the bush at the top of the teleost tree. You can take any point in the tree of life, splay it out from the middle, and it'll look like a burst. Okay, so this in no way implies that there was nothing before humans. That's totally disingenuous. This is known in science as an unrooted tree. Okay, it's the exact same pattern as the one for all of life, and that's just for modern humans. Okay, the shape of it doesn't prove anything.
Time. Go ahead and wrap it up.
Yeah, that's good.
So, SFT, you're on mute. Okay, make sure you do that. You have 5 minutes. I'm going to warn you. I'm going to give you a reminder and 1 minute to go. So whenever you're ready, I'll start the timer.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I should have wrapped half my brain behind my back because it's too easy. Bill and the audience I know can see it. He's not even debating universal ancestry. Keeps going back to the scripture, butchering the text. What he butchers the text with is not consistent with the scientific data. So we can just kind of toss that out. Still hasn't answered any of the problems with universal common ancestry. Still didn't answer I think I asked about 5 or 6 questions and he actually didn't even attempt to answer any of them. So maybe he can do that in the next rebuttal. Now that tree is a reflection of only a few hundred generations. That's the point. And the length of the branches break the evolutionary molecular clock. Still not answering the question of fast mutation rates and human phylogeny that are consistent with the biblical model of ancestry. Yes, unrooted trees give us a beautiful reflection of the data without what? Evolutionary based assumptions. And once again, we've made successful testable predictions on the history of civilization, as well as predictions on mutation rates in people groups like the Khoisan peoples who we don't yet know their mutation rate. And still, Bill has failed to provide his own testable predictions. I'm going to screen share in a second a number of papers that are inconsistent with universal common ancestry because he said they don't exist. Well, arguments from Bill don't exist, apparently. He also talked about in his previous rebuttal, he's not addressing anything that I'm saying, but I'm going to try and address everything he's saying, even if it is off topic. He's been off topic the entire debate. He talked about fossils, the order of the sequences in the geological record, dinosaurs and humans, why aren't they found together, dinosaur eggs. Well, Bill, once again, clearly does not understand the mechanism of the flood itself, horizontal and vertical movements of the plates, right? We've got these meters per second movements of the plates. Today, we see continental drift. In the past, we'd be looking at continental sprint, catastrophic plate tectonics, which can best explain the necessary conditions to rapidly buckle the strata and produce these mountains. These snail-paced movements of the plates that we see today, it will not explain what we see in terms of the geology, okay? And Bill can scoff at this, but we'll see if he has an answer to this because I've used it many times. He hasn't had an answer to anything else. Let's see if he has an answer to this. We've made a testable prediction based on this flood model, okay, where the fountains of the Great Deep break open, plates are moving at meters per second movements. We've got runaway subduction, and therefore we've made a prediction that we should find these slabs of cool rock at the base of the mantle. And it just so turns out that with modern seismology, we have found these massive slabs of cool rock at the base of the mantle. These slabs were not taken down there millions of years ago, Bill, or else they would have melted, okay? Or at least cooled up, warmed up to the material around it. How do you explain that testable prediction? If you're not making testable predictions, which is the gold standard of science, you don't have a scientific model. Still hasn't answered the questions of the Y chromosome dissimilarity between humans and chimpanzees. How do you fixate so many mutations in that time frame since the split? Hasn't answered the inconsistencies with the chromosome 2 fusion. Hasn't answered how the junk DNA paradigm has been overturned. If he accepts that it's been overturned, then he has an even bigger problem with genetic degeneration. He's stuck between a rock and a hard place, which is why he keeps running to the scripture and going off topic because it doesn't have anything in terms of this debate, okay? What we see in the fossil record, we see burial by ecosystems and habitats. What we see is actually what we would expect to find in a global flood. Marine creatures all throughout, slow-moving creatures at the bottom, like worms, for example. We've got trilobites, fish, land animals, and creatures. And when we actually take it from a biblical starting point, okay, then we know that God created two people and populations of animals. So we'd expect at the flood billions of animals, and that's what we find is billions of fossils and very little to no human fossils. Okay, so obviously dinosaurs and man, for one, would not have lived in the same ecosystem or habitat. Just like today, different animals live in different habitats. You're not going to find humans and elephants buried together. Okay, so we find that in the pre-flood world. And we also know that in the land of Eden, we are told in the scripture that a river flows out of Eden. And we know rivers flow downhill. So we can assume that Eden was at a higher elevation. And we know certain animals such as dinosaurs, certain dinosaur species live in swampy lowland areas. So various animals of various ecosystems and habitats were separated from man and other forms of life. But that being said, the evidence corroborates a global flood, but it doesn't matter in terms of this debate because the burden of proof is on Bill to demonstrate universal common ancestry. And I have asked a number of questions that hopefully he can answer in the next rebuttal. Hopefully he can explain the cold slap.
Go ahead and wrap it up.
And I'd like to see some predictions of his own. If he wants to look to uniformitarianism, let's make some predictions, Bill, in geology and in genetics. Go ahead.
So now we're going to move into our last session, and then it's going to be a rapid session. You get 2 minutes. I'm going to try to give you a 20-second warning. So these are going to be quicker. So if you have something big planned here, I wouldn't do it here. So whenever you want to start, Bill, it's your turn, and you also are on mute if you want. There you go. So whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Okay, let me share my screen here. So yeah, let's talk about punctuated equilibrium. Now, he goes on and on about mutation rates. Mutation rates don't, like I already quoted, random mutations do not account for large-scale changes in organisms. Okay, it just creates diversity within a species because a species emerges and then it becomes stable for a long period of time. Okay, that's what Stephen Jay Gould presented in 1977 as punctuated equilibrium. Here he is in the middle complaining about the way creationists took his words completely out of context and lied about them. And I'll quote him saying, transitional forms are generally lacking at the species level, but they are abundant between larger groups. That's why fossils are so important, but Standing for Truth wants to dodge them. Now, again, in the applied sciences, okay, he was challenging the prevailing assumption of evolution that it was gradualism. Okay, people challenge science all the time, and he got it published because it was a legitimate critique. Okay, and when people when they studied the evolution of technology, which Standing for Truth has yet to touch upon, they were expecting gradualism, but they found punctuated equilibrium. I'll quote, the results contradict the prediction of a single S-curve. Instead, technological evolution seems to follow a step function with sharp improvements in performance following long periods of no improvement. So once again, we have this perfect congruence between human technology and biological evolution. I don't know why it's worthwhile to deny God in evolution when evolution glorifies God. And that brings us back. Okay. Is it time?
Okay, so you're going to end it there. So,
is that it? I thought you said time.
Yeah, 20 seconds. Go ahead. I'll restart it from the 20-second period. So I'll let you finish out here. Go ahead and go.
Yeah, and I lost my train of thought anyway. So go ahead.
Okay, so SFT, when you're ready, we'll start the 2-minute timer. I'm going to try to warn you at 20 seconds, and we'll go from there.
All right. Well, here we go. So here's some more papers. His punctuated equilibrium is not going to work either because of the genetic boundaries that we see in species. He still hasn't addressed the genetic boundary study, the Rockefeller study that demonstrates limited ancestry. Over 90% of all species today originated at the same time. But I wanted to go here. These are from Dr. John Sanford's presentation at the NIH. I'd wonder if he has watched this, as in Bill, and we've got paper and reference after paper and reference in terms of how mutations, it seems unlikely that any mutation is truly neutral in the sense that it has no effect on fitness. All mutations must have some effect, even if that effect is vanishingly rare. And you can go into Kondrashov's question, where he talks about accumulation of very slightly deleterious mutations, VSDMS, that's what that means. They all acknowledge it. Okay, right here, Crow's concern. The typical mutation is very mild. It usually has no overall effect, overt effect, but shows up as a small decrease in viability or fertility. So this is acknowledged by all population geneticists right here. The decrease in viability from mutation accumulation is some 1 to 2% per generation. Put shelf lives on genomes. And there's been numerical simulations. It's all been documented that your junk DNA is not going to work. That's been overturned. He still hasn't answered the question. Does he hold to junk DNA or not? If he does, he's doing it because he needs to absorb those mutations to make them absolutely neutral. If he doesn't, then that really puts shelf lives on genome. So it's paper after paper. In the last 20 seconds, I'll skip to here. How does he explain such few species, all in line with 4,500 years since the flood? Bird species only about 18,000. New bird species today. 4,600 lizard species, snake species.
Time, go ahead and wrap it up.
Rabbit species. Overall, all in line with the creation model, and we made testable predictions on speciation rates. So,
all right, so that's our first round of the rapid session. Then we're going to have one more round that we're going to go into concluding remarks. So, Bill, you're on mute when you're ready to go ahead, and we'll start your timer.
Yeah, so I'm an artist. I haven't read the entire body of scientific literature. I'm not sure why I'd be expected to know all that stuff, but I did happen to read that paper that says, like 90% of all organisms originated around the same time. What time was that, standing for truth? What time was that in the paper? Oh, it was like 70 million years ago. Why are you leaving that part out? That's dishonest. That's bearing false witness to act like that paper supports you. And what about the other 10% of organisms that are not included in that 90%? When did they arise according to that paper? You're like this whole like cherry picking something out of real science and like, oh, it supports us, and then you just quote from all these people like Sanford that can't get past peer review. That's not going to cut it. I established my standards at the beginning of this. Okay, and your idea that there's a shelf life on genomes and all this stuff about mutations. I already showed you in the science that mutations are not what's accounting for evolution. It's not known yet. The mechanism of how evolution happens is not known yet. I think epigenetic evolution has a lot of promise. A new paper on plant epigenetic evolution showed that an entire species at once can get an adaptation in one generation. They don't have to wait to reproduce. In their lifetime, they can adapt to a situation simultaneously across the population, and then that adaptation can be passed on to offspring. So at this point, it hasn't changed the genome yet, just how the genes are expressed. However, if that environmental stress stays, if the environmental stress leaves, it'll revert. But if it stays, that change will eventually trickle down to the genome itself. That seems like a very plausible mechanism, which also makes evolution entirely guided. It's also, you're talking about microevolution mutation rates and trying to apply it to macroevolution, which has a slower rate, which I already quoted for you.
All right, so that's the 2-minute mark. Do you want to wrap up, or are you done
Junk DNA. Yeah, science is conservative, okay? So when science cannot say that there's a function, they're not going to say there's a function. I don't subscribe to that because I'm not a scientist. So as a non-scientist, I'm like, yeah, all DNA has a function, but scientifically, you can't say that until you've actually identified the function.
All right, SFT, you're going to conclude our rapid round for the last 2 minutes. I'm going to try to get you the last 20 seconds on your, whenever you're ready, I'll start the timer.
Yeah, so the more functional the genome is, the more these 100 new mutations per person per generation that accumulate, the more deleterious they are. And there have been numerical simulations done that shows even if the genome is 10% functional, and it looks like that Bill is admitting that at least more than 10% is functional, we actually have evidence for at least 60 to 80% genome-wide activity Now, a lot of that is biochemical, through ENCODE and various other research projects following ENCODE. But that's why us as young Earth creationists, we've been able to make predictions on DNA function when it comes to these hierarchical patterns in DNA, predictions in terms of pseudogenes, ERVs, these other variation-inducing genetic elements. So still, all day, Bill has not provided even one testable prediction. He just pretty well admitted defeat with junk DNA because, yes, he doesn't understand genetic degeneration. I would recommend he goes and looks into it. He's trying to apply it to large-scale evolution and macroevolution, assuming macroevolution even happened when it couldn't, because these deleterious mutations that are accumulating put shelf lives on genomes, and he doesn't get it. He doesn't get it. So we can try again another date. He doesn't get this paper, the genetic boundaries paper. The point was, and I'll read this, that the pattern was found. It doesn't fit the common ancestor at all. And when they come up with their date, they're using evolutionary assumptions. They're not using actual mutation rates or the levels of diversity, because when we look at the mutation rates and we will look at the number of mutations and the levels of diversity, it fits only a few thousand years. But the evolutionists assume it's circular. They assume the geological column when they look at the mutation rates, because the mutation rate today is far too fast, to
20 seconds
for deep time evolution. So they have to look to the geological record, make all these assumptions. But what I showed on these phylogenetic trees is that the evolutionary assumptions in terms of the evolutionary molecular clock is broken. That's why they can't make any testable predictions. And right here, last thing I'll say, using evolutionary assumptions about mutation rates, which of course assume evolutionary ages,
time, wrap it up.
Give an inflated time scale. They don't have the ages. Genetics puts shelf lives on genomes, and Bill has yet to address that data.
Well, there it is, you guys. It was a great debate. We're going to move into our very last portion, which is the concluding remarks. And since Standing just got done going through a presentation, I'm thinking maybe it would be best to let Bill start first with his conclusion, concluding remark. So it's a 5-minute period. So whenever you're ready, Bill, go ahead and give us your concluding remarks, what you thought of the debate, whatever you want to convey to the audience, and we'll start it whenever you're ready.
Okay, yeah. So punctuated equilibrium shows that microevolutionary mutations do not scale up to macroevolution, because it's not a linear progression. So you can't do that. That's a wrong assumption. And everything he's quoting from that supports him is not peer-reviewed literature. Okay, and he wants a testable prediction, so I will give him a testable prediction. I'm going to share my screen here. My prediction, it's a very simple one, is that you will never find a dinosaur in a layer of rocks dated to the Cambrian. Okay? That's a prediction based on the fact that the layers are sorted chronologically. Okay, if they're all laid down by a flood, there would be no reason to make that assumption. Okay. Here we have the geological column on the, I don't know if I screen shared or not, but the geological column shows the Cambrian at the very bottom, so you'll never find a dinosaur in there.
There we go.
Okay, there we go. So my real concluding statement, I want to quote from St. Augustine in the literal meaning of Genesis. This is why this matters. This is why I'm so passionate about this. He says, usually even a non-Christian knows something about the earth, the heavens, and the other elements of this world, about the motion and orbits of the stars, and even their size and relative positions, and about the predictable eclipses of the sun and moon, the cycles of the years and the seasons, about the kinds of animals, shrubs, stones, and so forth. And this knowledge he holds to as being certain from reason and experience. So in other words, people that aren't Christians happen to know a lot about science sometimes. He says, now it is a disgraceful and dangerous thing for an infidel to hear a Christian, presumably giving the meaning of Holy Scripture, talking nonsense on these topics, and we should take all means to prevent such an embarrassing situation in which people show up vast ignorance in a Christian and laugh it to scorn. I did that a lot growing up. I laughed Christians to scorn because of the ridiculous things they would say about evolution. The shame is not so much that an ignorant individual is derided, but that people outside the household of faith think our sacred writers held such opinions, and to the great loss of those for whose salvation we toil, the writers of our scripture are criticized and rejected as unlearned men. That happens all the time to modern day Christians because of this debate. If they find a Christian mistaken in a field they themselves know well and hear him maintaining his foolish opinions about our books, how are they going to believe those books in matters concerning the resurrection of the dead, the hope of eternal life, and the kingdom of heaven when they think their pages are full of falsehoods on facts which they themselves have learned from experience in the light of reason. So when I, as a kid, saw fossils, which standing for truth refuses to even go and talk about fossils, when I saw fossils and Christians were talking nonsense about that, I assumed they were talking nonsense about Jesus as well. That's not okay. The Bible tells us to be wise in the way we talk to outsiders. In 1 Corinthians 9, Paul talks about he became like the Jew to win over the Jews. He became like the weak to win the weak. He became like everybody to win them to Christ. If you can't speak to me without, massive fail, blah, 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 and I'm already a Christian. Like, if I wasn't a Christian, I would hate you right now. Okay? I love you as a brother in Christ, but what you're doing is not okay. And lying and saying that science supports you, which you did several times in this debate, is not okay. Even if science is wrong, it doesn't currently support you at all. And it's creating a mockery of Christ. And that's not okay. Oh, that's good for me.
Okay, so you have about a minute to go. We'll just put it into the question and answer session, a little bit more time. So SFT, your concluding remark, I'll begin when you're ready to go.
How long do I have, Praise?
5 minutes.
Okay. Okay, I appreciate it. So his prediction was based on a straw man argument. Okay, if he understood burial by ecosystems and habitats, I have talked about fossils. I talked about the global flood, even though that's not the topic of the debate. But here I am addressing all his points, and he's addressed maybe 0.1% of my entire presentation. And it's so funny because he says the papers that I showed are not peer reviewed. Well, I'm going to destroy that in a second. I'm going to screen share. But his prediction is based on a straw man argument, okay, as well as a misunderstanding of the pre-flood world, which I already went into about different elevations, different habitats, how God created two people and fully functional populations of ecosystems. That's besides the point. If he understood that, he wouldn't make such a ridiculous prediction. Everywhere we look, okay, there is abundant evidence from geology that the flood really did occur, and he keeps looking to fossils. Nothing in fossils supports evolution. We see stasis. We see explosions of body plans that the evolutionists can't explain through their evolutionary mechanisms and processes. What we see in the fossil record supports what? Massive death and burial on a global scale. If he wants to debate the global flood, let's do it. But he did not even try to address, as always, the cold slabs prediction. Why are they not melted or warmed up if they were subducted millions of years ago? This was a testable prediction made by a PhD young Earth creation geophysicist. Okay, he wants to scoff at young Earth creation. Bill wants to scoff at young Earth creation, think we're going to be all nice, and he fits that category of 2 Peter 3, the scoffers in the last day. They're going to deny the special creation. They're going to deny the flood. I don't know if he denies the coming judgment. I wouldn't accuse him of that. But the best way to determine ancestry is through genetics. Fossils and bones in the dirt are not inherited in sperm and egg. Genetics is the best way to determine ancestry. He realized, obviously, that he was wrong about the genetic boundary study. He came in all tough in his last rebuttal, saying, oh, why don't you quote the rest of the paper? Then I point out that the paper has built-in evolutionary assumptions, and then he doesn't rebut it. The genetic boundary study alone, which I talked about over an hour ago in my opening presentation, destroys his entire position today about universal common ancestry because it puts boundaries. It puts a limited ancestry. And that refutes universal ancestry. He still doesn't get mutation accumulation. And I will say this. We have actually determined boundaries and limited ancestry and also the fossil record. In the fossil record, we can use baraminology, okay? And we can look to both discontinuities and continuities. We had Dr. Matthew McLean here speaking on this, going over his amazing findings. And he pointed out that when you're looking for created kinds and limited ancestry, you want to find a group that is discontinuous and separated out from every other group. And yet within it, there exists continuity. And this would be a solid way to approximate the created kind, okay? And guess what? We have found just this in fossil groups. One example is in the mammal-like reptiles. We found this in Dinosauria. We found these boundaries. We find these strong discontinuities and not one continuous unbroken chain from one type of creature to another. So we have the genetic data. We have the fossil record data. And when you look to the fossil record, anyways, when you go to the first layers where there's an abundance of fossils in them, okay, well, below we see no fossils. And in these layers above them, we find every one of the major body plans of the major division of creatures. We call those the phylum. And Bill probably knows this is the Cambrian explosion. So we go from layers with no fossils to layers with fossils. Highly complex body plans, such as the trilobite. Look at their lens system, highly, highly sophisticated lens system. No real hint of this large-scale evolution. He keeps looking to punctuated equilibrium, which is, it just shows how circular their thinking is because, well, it happened in spurts or a slow and gradual process. The last thing I'll do is, I got 1 minute. Let me share screen here to conclude it. If you want to pause my timer, Praise.
Yeah.
Okay, you can continue it. So here's some of the papers about the discontinuities found in these fossil groups. This one is about the Dinosauria. Okay, we have clear data separating humans from chimpanzees. And the last thing I'll say, not peer-reviewed paper from secular literature. I went through a ton of papers in my openings, functional DNA elements with pseudogenes, endogenous retroviruses. These are all, look at 4 papers right here, retroviral promoters in the human genome, jumping genes, functional, intronic ALUs influence alternative splicing, translational pausing, protein moonlighting, and all of those papers from those population geneticists that I showed that Dr. John Sanford was looking to at his NIH presentation, those were all from secular literature. So Bill, I love you as a brother in Christ, but you're wrong about the science. You're reinterpreting the scripture, but your reinterpretation is not corroborated by the scientific data. And it was a good debate, a lot of fun. I can't believe a couple hours have gone by, and I yield.
Yeah, that concludes the debate, guys. It was really passionate. That was a good thing. It's not bad to have passion when you debate. So both sides had good points, I think, and let the audience decide who won. Now we're going to go into the Q&A session, and if you guys didn't notice,
Praise, if you don't mind, let's make because I know there's some after show, so let's make the Q&As section maybe like 15 minutes, so we don't go too far past 2 hours. And let's take, as we've been doing in some of the previous debates, let's take a 2-minute intermission. What goes in must come out. I've drank quite a few bottles of water here, so brief intermission. Then we'll go through the super chats and about a 15-minute Q&A if you don't mind, Praise.
Will do. All right, go ahead and we'll take our 2-minute break.
Okay, I'm back. Praise, why are you doing your
That wasn't me, man. Okay,
yeah. Okay. We are back.
I heard that.
Over. Praise is rocking the soundboard. And yeah, let's get through as many of these as we can, and we'll head over to some after shows.
Yeah, so if you guys didn't notice, but there was a super chat war between Jamie and Raymond or Rahman. And Rahman took the high position there. He won with the $200 super chat. So,
whoa, no, I didn't get to see the chat. Well, thank you so much for the amazing support. I know we had over 70 people in the chat, and I hope everybody had a good time. I know that these tend to get a little heated, but at the end of the day, we can still shake hands and say, good job. This was fun.
yeah, absolutely. So we better dive in. 15 minutes super chat, or the question and answers. There's no way we're going to get around to all of them. I don't even think we can get around to all super chats. So we're going to do our best. So Ramen Goiza Dango for $200. And here's what he has a question. So Bill, SFT, does your best evidence satisfy Dr. Stadler's high confidence science criteria? Number one, repeatably. Number two, directly measurable and accurate results. Number three, prospective interventional study. Number four, careful to avoid bias. Number five, careful to avoid assumptions. Number six, sober judgment of results. Do you agree with that criteria?
I'll go first, I guess. I would say that yes, fossil finds are repeatable. You repeatedly find fossils in the same layers all around the world. I would also say that the tree of life data that I showed, where they looked at 16 ribosomal proteins, that's also easily repeatable by any other scientist that wants to do that. And obviously, they're directly measuring these 16 proteins, and you can also directly measure where in the rock you find the fossils. So, yeah, that's. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by prospective and interventional study. I'm not familiar with those words in terms of science. Careful to avoid bias, careful to avoid assumptions, and sober judgment of results is why I respect the peer review process, because it's not perfect. It doesn't get rid of all bias, but it is the best system ever devised by humans to get rid of bias in an epistemological system. So because it was peer reviewed in a major journal, and because no peer reviewed literature has come out questioning it, I would say, yes, it does hit 4, 5, and 6 as well.
Okay. My response would be when it comes to high confidence and low confidence science, it comes down to what I was pointing out earlier, in that the best way to determine ancestry is through genetics. Okay. A fossil is not inherited sperm and egg. Geography is not inherited sperm and egg. And oftentimes fossils can be deceiving. For example, it's difficult without the genetics to determine what is the result of homology, what is the result of convergent evolution. Because even today, we have oftentimes more variation within the same species than we have between species. So that's why, for example, if every single domesticated dog was buried in a flood today and fossilized, and thousands of years later they were dug up, all sorts of erroneous interpretations would be made. And we have examples of that. One example is in Dr. Stadler's book, where they had dinosaur fossils that they were categorizing as different species, when in fact it was the same species, but different ages. You know, you had a teenage one and an adult one, just showing how inconsistent the fossil record can be when making these interpretations. But I'll just say, overall, fossils, as I indicated in my closing statement, are evidence of catastrophism. I mean, we've got fossils of animals giving birth. It doesn't take millions of years to give birth. Thank God. We've got fossils of fish being eaten. This all suggests sudden and rapid burial. And I could go on and on, but I'll yield there. And praise, I did notice we have a lot of questions, so we can go longer than 15 minutes. However long we can go.
Yeah,
is fine
and
with me. Yeah.
The way we do it here on our debates is we allow whoever the question was addressed to, they can finish it with the last comment. So Bill, was addressed to you. So if you want to finish with something, go ahead, man.
Okay, well, yeah, he's still avoiding the footprints in the fossil record, and how footprints. That image I showed where there's footprints in different layers on top of each other, that's all the Colorado Plateau. That's one geographic location. He didn't address how footprints would appear like that in a flood model. And the fact that fossils are buried rapidly, which I affirmed several times in my presentation, does not mean that they were all buried rapidly by the same event. And he also avoided the enormous fossil find that was buried in arid conditions, a sandstorm in sand dunes in the desert. A flood cannot, that was rapid burial. They were rapidly buried by blowing sand, but that's not a flood at all.
Very good. So we're going to go into the next one, do a super sticker from Jamie Russell for $50.25 pwned. So
I appreciate that, brother. I appreciate it.
It helps the ministry, and also I believe SFT's children to go to college.
You put my kids through college, as I always say. It allows us to continue putting out full-time content, interviews, discussions, and debates. So
absolutely,
I appreciate that so much. God bless everybody.
So Raman again, he did another super chat. He had at least 25 tonight. I'm saying at least 25 super chats. So here's one for $50 super sticker. Thank you so much, Raman. Then we got another one from Jamie Russell again, $20.25. I win. God did it. So you don't have to respond to that if you don't guys don't want to. We'll get to the questions though. How about that? So here's a $20 question from Raman Goizadango again. Why does Bill think yom means unknown when yom plus number like 1, 2, first, second always equals 24-hour day or part thereof? This is true 359 times outside Genesis 1 in the Old Testament, even in poetry and prophecy.
The reason I think that is for the same reason that I think rakia means firmament. I read the biblical scholarship on this subject. The Westminster Theological Seminary, which I quoted from about they said that rakia absolutely means firmament. That same exact source also said that there's nothing to force these days to have to be 24 hours. And again, just looking at the text itself, it tells us on creation day 4 is when the actual measurement of a 24-hour human day started to exist. And, Standing for Truth, who rejects the firmament and thinks we live in a solar system, has an even bigger problem because 24 hours only exists on the Earth. Look at what the days are for other planets. Jupiter, it's like 18 hours. Venus, it's like something crazy like 1,000 hours. I don't know what it is. Okay? It's all over the place. And that's just for our solar system. What about in other galaxies? God created all of it. You're going to tell me all of that is timed by this one little tiny planet? I don't think so. And so if you're rejecting a firmament, you've got no hope of 24-hour days at all. Even if you're going so literal that you say we're in a firmament, I still don't know how we get 24-hour days because Genesis 1:14 tells us that measurement does not exist until creation day 4. 2 Peter 3:8 tells us that a day with God is like 1,000 years. Okay, it's a hyperbole. It just expresses that God is not constrained to human time. Like a day in the context of God can be a really long time in the context of humans. So deep time just glorifies God because it shows how much bigger God is than all the rest of us.
Very good. And SFT, if you want to respond, go ahead, man.
Sure. I would just say when it comes to the firmament, many who hold to the canopy position, which I believe there is some good evidence for, would say that is indicative of the firmament. And I would say when it comes to yom, the context of Genesis demands that yom means a 24-hour solar day. And when it comes to a day is like 1,000 years, that is in reference to the end times and the promise of his coming. As in, don't worry, to God, a day is like 1,000 years. So sure, it's been a couple thousand years and Christ still hasn't returned yet, but to God, that's nothing. So yeah, it depends on context. The word yom in that passage, depending on the context, can mean something different than the word yom being used in Genesis. But the majority of times that the word yom is used is indicative of a 24-hour solar day, and that seems to be the context in Genesis. And most importantly, the scientific data is corroborated by that interpretation anyways. So we don't need to reinterpret the data. Bill, he's shaking his head, but we just had a 2-hour debate where he literally avoided every single line of evidence scientifically that demonstrates a 6-day creation, and then God rested on the seventh, and independent origins and special creation. He ignored genetic entropy, Y chromosome data, mitochondrial DNA data, and I can go on and on. Bill, you're shaking your head. Okay, why don't you just stay still while I'm talking? You don't need to do all your little movements there. You didn't address anything. So shake your head all day, but the audience can see that you dodged the entire debate. Go ahead. It was his question.
Go ahead, Bill. We'll try to make it pithy because we got other questions.
Okay, I'll try to make this quick. I don't know why he's lying and saying that I didn't address entropy at all. I had an entire slide about entropy prepared for this debate because I knew he was going to talk about it. And then I even quoted from another paper talking about how most of evolution is driven by gene loss. So I don't know why he's claiming I didn't address that. But the question was about day. And he said that, the context of Genesis, demands that we read it as a 24-hour solar day. A 24-hour solar day did not exist until creation day 4, as Genesis 1:14 tells us, and Standing for Truth did not address that verse at all.
Actually, I did.
All right. So we got to get to the next one. So this is from Jamie Russell. You carry oats? ? Checkmate. I'm not sure what that means. So,
whales and pine trees are related because they're both eukaryotes. That's one of their best arguments. I think that's what he means by it.
So we got George Bond for $20. I'm donating my Friday pizza to feed SFT's kids. Awesome.
George is a bad influence because every time he sends me a picture of his awesome looking pizza, I go up to the wife and say, honey, we need to order pizza. So, George, you got to stop, brother. I appreciate the super chat, by the way.
Yes, very well. Thank you so much, George Bond. This is another from Ramen for $5. Question, why quote Augustine? He believes 6,000 years and confused 6 days into instant. This is opposite of the Evo story. So I guess that's directed at you, Bill, if you want to respond to that.
Yeah, I'll respond to that. St. Augustine didn't have a reason to think that the earth was older than 6,000 years. But as you pointed out, he did not read these as 6 24-hour solar days, like Standing for Truth just tried to say. That's not how St. Augustine read it. In his literal meaning of Genesis treatise, St. Augustine said, these are absolutely not 24-hour days. Now, he didn't have any compelling reason to think that they were any longer. So he's like, maybe they were instantaneous. Because he thought if it required time for God to create something, it makes God weak to act like, it took him a whole day to create this. And that was his way of looking at it. But I tend to think the fact that it took billions of years shows how powerful God is and how much long-suffering patience God has to stick with it for so long. Now, St. Augustine did say that if people can show through science that something is reasonably true, which geology absolutely has with the age of the earth, then the role of a Christian is to show how that fits with the scripture. Not to deny it, not to see it as some existential threat, but to show how it glorifies God. That's what I'm doing here today. That's why I quoted Augustine, because I want to show everybody how evolution glorifies God, how deep time glorifies God. It's all about the glory of God. I don't care about winning this. It's about glorifying God.
Thank you for your response. Go ahead, SFT, if you want to respond to that.
So I have a book here that I recommend where there's an entire chapter going through the last 2,000 years of church history and all of these positions, day age, the positions that Bill holds to, gap theory, progressive creationism, they're all new inventions. Okay, all your church fathers, your biblical scholars, they all held to the position, the literal historical account position of Genesis that I hold to today and that I put forth today. And he's shaking his head, but I dare him to go into this book and refute the section where Dr. Jonathan Sarfati goes through it to a T. So maybe Bill can find an actual rebuttal to that. He hasn't given any rebuttals today. He didn't know what I meant by entropy, seemed to be applying it to thermodynamic entropy, failed completely there. And when it comes to the age of the earth, the fact is I could share a screen right now and show you 100 different ways to limit the age of the earth. One example is the fact that carbon decays so quickly that let's say if every single atom in the universe was made of carbon It would all decay within 1 million years easily. So now we got these evolutionists that point to these rocks and fossils that they say are millions of years old. Okay. Well, they should then have no carbon left. This is actually precisely why they won't use carbon dating in the first place, because they've assumed uniformitarianism, 2 Peter 3, which Bill assumes. Okay, they assume they're old, but yet it turns out, lo and behold, we've got radiocarbon that exists in all sorts of fossils. We find it in diamonds, coal, fossilized wood, and all of these arguments that Bill
we got to
here
wrap
could
her
look
up
to.
here, SFT.
All these arguments that Bill here could look to, the rate team actually looked at. And all those rescue devices don't work. Contamination doesn't work. And the rescue devices have been looked at. And these results, this is the last thing I'll say, these results are repeatable. You find radiocarbon and all of these different things, dinosaur bones, fossils, diamonds, coal, fossilized wood. How do the uniformitarians explain that? Through rescue devices. I yield.
Okay, we kind of got off topic there, but I'll answer real quick. He says that, oh, you know, his deep time view is not historical within the church. Guess what? A firmament is what everybody in the church believed all the way up through Martin Luther. Remember, I had the illustration from Martin Luther's Bible in 1500s. Nobody before that thought there was deep outer space. They all thought we lived inside it, even though a lot of people knew by the time of Christ that we lived on a globe. That globe was still inside a globular firmament, a circular dome around it. So I don't see how you're applying your logic to one thing and not the other. It's like either we don't allow science and we got a young Earth under a dome, or we do allow science and we got an old Earth in a solar system. I can't possibly see how you get a young Earth in a solar system. It makes absolutely zero sense to me. Now, you know, he touched on entropy again, whatever. Carbon dating, he brought that up. Carbon dating isn't used for anything past like 50,000 years. Why are you talking about that?
That's the point. That's the point. It shouldn't be in there.
Okay, well, no.
Hold on. Yeah, I got to step in here.
Okay, keep going.
Let's let him finish.
We got to make these
short. Carbon's going to decline at a fairly regularly rate. Okay, that doesn't mean it's just going to boom hit zero. Okay, it's going to decay exponentially, and it's going to be an asymptote to zero. Okay.
So let SFT respond. Go ahead, SFT, respond to that quickly.
No,
we got to move on.
It was his question. He can have the last word. Well, I'll keep to the rules. But hey, did you want to do a rapid fire through the super chats? Because I see a lot of super chats, and I want to at least those.
Right. I'm gonna. So we had one cow stampede is gives several. You had a $10 super chat, I believe a $20 super chat, and a $5 super chat. So thank you so much. Super stickers. Thank you so much, One Cow Stampede. Now we're going to go to LPP's question for $5. Bill, even though I think you're wrong, you're welcome to the after show. I won't let people be mean. So it's open. You're welcome to come to LPP's after show.
Okay. Well, tell me where to click.
We will.
Yeah. It's he put it in the chat if you want to check it out there. It's there. So we'll get on to the next one. We have now we're done with really the super chats, or the super stickers as well. We're going to go into a question. So this is from Crimsonair. Do the deleterious mutations not apply to single-celled organisms? If so, how are they still intact after 6,000 years? SFT, that's pointed to you.
Great question. So I actually wrote about this extensively in my book. Genetic entropy was written for longer lived mammals, right? Your elephants, your humans, your chimpanzees. They are on the verge of extinction. Okay, deleterious mutation accumulation will degenerate larger mammals. Now, when it comes to your bacteria, well, bacteria have incredibly short generation times, massive population sizes. Okay, so there's a number of reasons where they may be able to fight off genetic degeneration. But what's funny is, considering that fact, you can look to the Lenski experiment, where the Lenski experiment demonstrates that bacterial populations actually do undergo a sort of genetic degeneration, what's called reductive evolution, where in order to adapt they will lose genes. Okay, they're losing genes short term for adaptive purposes, but it's long-term degeneration. And his bacterial populations, believe it or not, what they did was they shrank in functional genome sizes. They're lazy, they're handicapped, they're cornered essentially, where if they were put into any other environment, they would die off. They'd go extinct immediately, essentially. But also, I'll point this out, is bacteria, they have a very, very low mutation rate. And no one's going to argue that the number of bacteria in the world is clearly massive. I mean, over 1 quadrillion easily. So all of these factors considered, this is the perfect recipe for natural selection to purify. And yet we still see with these long-term bacterial experiments, we still see reductive evolution. And the last thing I'll say, viruses, there's an incredible paper in the secular literature too, from Dr. John Sanford, Dr. Robert Carter, where they identified that the H1N virus went from a red hot pandemic to a whimper to an extinction event, all because of genetic degeneration. So that, I'll yield there.
Yeah. So Bill, if you want to quickly respond to that, go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, he admitted that bacteria might be able to fight off these deleterious mutations, and there's lots of them, so it's a good place for selection. Yeah, that's evolution. So I don't know why you're denying it. They kept bringing up this Lemsky experiment. I haven't read that experiment, but I do know that bacteria exist within a microbiome. It's an invisible ecosystem that we can't see, but it even includes our bodies. We're constantly exchanging bacteria with the environment, and bacteria are in constant interaction with everything in their environment. So if you take some out of their environment and you have them in this sterile lab, I don't know why you'd expect them not to just get sick and die. Like, that's not an experiment in their natural ecosystem of the microbiome. So I don't really see why that should demonstrate anything.
So it's directed to you, SFT, if you want to quickly finish up on that.
I'll get the last word on this one, since it's for me. So I can see why he doesn't understand the concept of genetic entropy, and why he pretty much just glosses over the massive number of papers and references that I had from population geneticists that are not young earth creationists, that are acknowledging this problem of very slightly deleterious mutations accumulating. Now, if you read their papers, the rescue devices that they look to, which Bill is not aware of because he's not up to date. He's not up to date on the literature. They look to synergistic epistasis, truncation selection, mutation count mechanism, a bunch of different mechanisms that have actually been falsified. They fail. So the fact is, genomes have shelf lives, and it limits the age of genomes, and it destroys universal common ancestry. He didn't get my point about bacteria. Let's say you've got more than 1 quadrillion bacteria. Go with that number. There's probably way more than that. But let's say their generation time is every 30 minutes. They're born, they grow up, they have kids, they have a family. Okay. So if the generation time is every 30 minutes and we've got all of those bacteria, well, we've got over 1 quadrillion bacteria dead every 30 minutes. So that type of reproduction rate seen in bacteria is ideal and perfect for natural selection. I'd like to ask Bill, do people reproduce that way? Of course not. Imagine we reproduce the same way bacteria did. We've got 7 or 8 billion people in the world today. If the population doubled every 30 minutes just to keep the population stable, you'd have to kill off 7 or 8 billion people every 30 minutes. So this whole argument from bacteria is silly. It's a joke, and it's a misunderstanding of genetic degeneration, which is a very real problem that Bill needs to study.
All right. Thank you for your answer there. And we're going to go to One Cow Stampede. Question for Bill. Is he aware that the phylogenetic incongruence of phylogeny of the ATP synthase results in an orchard of 26 independent origins of prokaryotes alone? Paper available.
No, I'm not aware of that research. Is that actual peer-reviewed literature? I'll read it if it is.
Yeah, he put paper available, so I guess I'm assuming that is peer-reviewed.
I mean,
so
the paper that I quoted from was from 2016 that mapped all of life, including prokaryotes, to common ancestry. It's all in the same tree of life. So if there's something that came out since 2016, I haven't seen it.
Yeah. So I'll say that he's obviously not aware of the incongruities. He's not aware of the assumptions that they make. I've got a million slides I'm trying to find where I've got these papers where they admit their inferences, they admit their assumptions, they admit that they assume the phylogenetic tree, but I've got a million slides. I can't find them. So they exist. He clearly has not read them. And he keeps saying, well, if it's real peer-reviewed literature, then I'd read it. Oh, that's funny, because the 200 papers that I showed, he hasn't read one of them, and they're all from the peer-reviewed literature, and they all destroy his position. But Bill's the type of guy where he will look to the Y chromosome paper, where they found out that the Y chromosome in humans and chimpanzees is less than 35% dissimilar. And when you consider overall gene content architecture, he'll look to the conclusion. He'll skip right to the conclusion, and he'll look at their rescue devices or their hypotheses and say, oh, it looks like they got an answer. But then he won't even look to see if that answer is valid or plausible. You know what? I want to give Bill the last word here, and I want him to finally answer the question, how do you explain the incredible dissimilarity between chimpanzee Y chromosome and Y chromosome? It was his question. Give him the last word. See if he'll answer that. And I want to know if he's read the paper. Go.
Okay, no, I have not read the paper, and I haven't read, I'm not a scientist. Why would you expect me to have read the entire body of scientific literature that might possibly...
Because I've used that argument. I've used that argument.
Let Bill finish. Let Bill finish. Go ahead,
Next
Bill.
time, prepare better, and you'll do better.
Let Bill finish.
Good advice. Yeah, you said I'm not up to date on mutations. You said that before. I quoted from a 2018 paper, and yes, it does examine things like epistasis. I read the whole paper. Yes, I did quote from it already. It's published in Nature. Okay, and it says that, yeah, that's an open problem in science. So I don't know why you're acting like I'm not familiar with the literature. Okay, you posted some peer-reviewed literature.
Answer the question.
Let me talk. Let me
talk.
Let me talk.
Question about chimpanzee Y chromosome. Yeah,
are you not going to let me talk?
No more dodging. Answer the question.
You're not going to let me talk.
Answer the question.
What am I allowed to talk about at this point in time?
For the 6th time this debate, how do you explain the incredible dissimilarity between chimpanzee and human Y chromosomes? Go. Take as much time as you need.
I don't care. I mean, you're
lost
calling
the
it incredible. You're calling it incredibly different.
Ancestry.
What is your metric? What is your metric? What percentage would be close enough, according to you, considering you don't even believe that they evolved from a common ancestor?
That's the point. The Y chromosome dissimilarity.
No. You're saying they're too different.
Dissimilarity shows that
you're saying they're not similar enough. You're saying they're not similar enough.
You're clueless.
I'm answering you. Let me talk. You're saying they're not similar enough. So what is your metric? Precisely how similar do they need to be for them to be considered similar enough in standing for truth world? And how did you arrive at that metric?
Okay. Considering the fact that the Y chromosome is non-recombining DNA, do you know what that means?
Why don't you educate the audience?
Well, then there's no point. You're not going to get it. You failed. I've just shown why it should be relatively more stable. And every single
I asked you a simple question. You said they're not similar enough. What is similar?
Every single human Y chromosome on the planet is nearly identical. And we have a fast mutation rate in the Y chromosome. But yet, every single human Y chromosome is 99.9% similar. The chimpanzee Y chromosome, which you say
do not all accumulate,
split from a common ancestor 6 million years ago, is less than 35% dissimilar. So your metric is to be a lot more similar than that. Go ahead. You can have the last word.
Mutations do not all accumulate. You can't just add them up backwards in time. The sexual reproduction takes care of that. We are not clones. Mutations do not all accumulate. A lot of times, a negative. Okay, when there's incest, you don't get enough diversity in there. And
all right, Bill, we gotta wrap this up. We got after shows and things. Please wrap it up.
Yeah, we're going on 2.5 hours, so maybe
I'm gonna wrap it up right here. In incest, like some people get these really large jaws. Okay, they get like weird deformities, and then when they start breeding with the regular population again, those go away. Because mutations don't all add up. God is sovereign over all creation. I don't know why you're missing that.
we'll end it there. Thank you for your
All right.
response, Bill.
Okay.
We're going to go to Steadfast and Easy for $5. Ask him if any of his peer-reviewed papers are assumptions free. I guess that's directed at you, Bill. If it might be directed at you, SFT, so maybe you both can answer that question.
No, the peer-reviewed literature is full of assumptions. Yeah. That's basically what science is. You make an assumption, you call it a hypothesis, and then you test that hypothesis. And if your assumption doesn't fit the data, then you adjust it. But what the peer-reviewed literature assures is a standard of equality. There's a specific scientific method, and that's what unites science, is by this scientific method. And the peer review ensures that at least other scientists that are in the same field have looked at the paper. They've decided, yeah, this meets our standard of quality. This follow the scientific method. So it gives you a reasonable amount of trust to start with. Like I said, I'm fine with questioning science, but you can't just say, oh, the science supports a young Earth, because the scientific data is found in the peer-reviewed literature. And right now, even if that peer-reviewed literature is wrong, it does not support a young Earth at all.
So go ahead and SFT if you want to respond to that.
Yeah, I'm going to share screen here real quick. So he, judging by his arguments, he blindly believes the conclusions. He blindly believes the assumptions going into these papers. Here's the Y chromosome dissimilarity paper. I want to point out that Bill's had months and months to prepare.
That's not peer-reviewed.
The Y chromosome paper is actually peer-reviewed, yes.
Why is it on creation.com?
Because this is a commentary of the paper. The actual paper, which I'll show you, is it's my time to talk. You clearly have not prepared, because it is a paper that I have brought up in several debates and directly refutes a universal ancestry. Which
I don't watch your channel all the time.
Stop. I'm talking. Mute yourself. Okay. So
right. So I know it's getting passionate, guys. We can't have the over talking. And please, can we stop the digs at each other? We don't want to do the ad hominems. We are brothers of Christ, so we please try to keep that minimal. Thank you so much.
Okay, so right here, David Page of the Whitehead Institute for Biomedical Research. This is not a young Earth creationist. He points out the Y is full of surprises. He and his team had just found that the Y chromosomes of chimps and humans are horrendously different from each other. See, I want to point out that Bill is lucky that we had timed rebuttals, which is good. I like this type of format, but in an open discussion, you could actually corner them and show that they're dodging. This was just one, guys. I want to point out to the audience. This was just one argument of about 100 that he dodged. And he can't even answer this simple question, which is a major problem for his position. He admitted he hasn't read the paper that destroys his position. And they talk about how the chimpanzee Y chromosome was horrendously different. But guess what? Guess what? The rescue devices that they look to in that paper, because I've read the paper and I'm up to date on the science, which Bill is not, the rescue device they look to doesn't work. Because when we look at Y chromosome diversity worldwide in humans, guess what? There's low diversity. So the only way to keep a Y chromosome worldwide in males that has incredibly low diversity, but yet a fast mutation rate, the only way to explain that is to explain it as the Y chromosome being young. And to...
All right, we got to wrap her up, SFT. We have a couple more questions we got to get to.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so this one is from, thank you for your answer, by the way. This is from Health First and Feelings Second. Question for Bill. Is death and suffering in the world the result of sin or the result of evolution over millions of years in the Big Bang?
The death that humans suffer is the result of sin. The death that occurs in nature is not. I don't like the idea that a single human decision can affect all of God's creation. That implies that God is not sovereign over creation. Now, what it says in the book of Romans that Standing for Truth quoted is that death came to man because of sin. Not all life forms, okay? In nature, that's the cycle of life. It's the constant recycling of forms, okay? It says in Genesis that they all were brought forth after their kind. That means they were reproducing. You can't have reproduction without death. Okay, death provides the new raw material for the new forms, and it keeps populations in harmony. Okay, what humans did is we opened up our eyes. We opened up our eyes. That's what it says in the Garden of Eden. We opened up our eyes. Okay, now we suffer death because we opened up our eyes to it. Okay, now you can think about cells in your body. Okay, we have billions of cells in my body. I'm healthy. Billions of cells in my body die every single day. I don't suffer that as death because my consciousness is not identified with a single cell. That's actually part of why I'm healthy. Okay, cell death called apoptosis or phagocytosis is why my skin is soft. It's why my muscles are strong. It's why my bones are hard. Okay, it's a natural function. It's this constant recycling of forms, just like in nature.
All right, we got to finish her up here. We got to keep. We got to move along. Go ahead, SFT. If you want to make it pithy, SFT, we got to make it going here. We got to get going.
Yeah, we're going on 2.5 hours, so I'm going to share a screen real quick. Death, extinction, degeneration as the result of the fall. What Bill's spewing here is not scriptural. He's anti-scripture, actually, and having this debate with him has made me realize that he's obviously never listened to sound preaching. He has never probably studied sound biblical hermeneutics. I'd love to discuss soteriology with him one day and see what he thinks about that, because he's really butchering the origins topic. So yes, man fell, introduced death, degeneration, and extinction into the world. And guess what? We have this mutation accumulation problem where we can take this point of most mutational accumulation, take that back to a point of least mutation accumulation. That would be a point of Adam and Eve, perfect genomes with no mutations. And we've got paper after paper here, okay, that are from the secular literature showing these populations in the past that have gone extinct due to mutation accumulation, due to inbreeding, due to that which is the result of the fall. And in the human population today, we see thousands and thousands of new diseases, mutation-related diseases, being added to the genetic database every single year. We're going downhill. We are all multiply mutant.
We got to wrap
and
her
there's
up.
no type of selection that can counterbalance the damage.
Very good. Thank you for your response. We got one from Rand. This is coming at you, SFT. The question for you now. Castle Mountain in Canada is a 600 million year old fossil layer on top of a 200 million year old layer. There's hundreds of more locations like that in North America alone.
So they're assuming uniformitarianism. They're assuming that I need a little more data on that to actually look at it. But when we actually look to the catastrophic plate tectonics model and the fact that the entire Earth would be covered by water, the tides would be harmonic, where you would have these layers being formed sideways forming layers. And that's why we can make these predictions based on the pre-flood ocean crust and the fact that it'd be dragged down into the mantle during this subduction process, where we find these cold slabs. So if you understand the model of flood geology, you can look to the catastrophic plate tectonics, the hydroplate model, the fact that you'd have sideway movement of the water creating these sedimentary layers. Okay, I mean, that's what we find continent-wide. Massive sedimentary layers that had to form catastrophically. So yeah, you can have those types of features in those types of layers where the evolutionists will assume that they were deposited over vast ages. But when you got the entire Earth covered by water, harmonic tide, and the forming of the layers through sideway movements of the water, perfectly explainable. And they never explain the testable predictions that we have from the flood model. So without any other, I guess, information on what he's saying, that's the best I could say.
Yeah, so we'll let Bill go ahead and respond to that if you want to. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with that particular find, but I will say that once again, Standing for Truth said that the floodwater washed across the entire continent, depositing this sediment. Now, there's hundreds of feet of sediment below the first set of footprints in the Grand Canyon, and that the sediment below those footprints goes across the whole continent. So if that tidal harmonic flood washed all the way across the continent with enough force to deposit all that sediment, where in the world did this land animal come from? How did it survive that to leave tracks on the land? And where was that dry land for it to leave tracks? Now, I didn't get a chance to quote the paper, but the paper actually shows that there's one set of tracks, then it got filled in a little bit, and another set of tracks on top of it. So there's a passage of time. Okay, and then on top of this, we have thousands more feet of sediment deposited by these tidal harmonics washing across the whole continent, and then more footprints. Where are these footprints coming from? It doesn't make any sense in that model.
We'll let it go. Yeah, go ahead, SFT. Go ahead and respond.
So the fact that we have fossilized footprints fossilized raindrops, okay? These fossilized animals where you can see every single detail suggest sudden and rapid burial. That's the only way you can get fossilized footprints in the first place.
Not
And
from one event.
It's my
Hold
turn
on,
to
Bill.
respond.
We got to let SFT respond.
And what you get oftentimes is the footprints of the creature before you actually get the creature itself. That's a problem for the uniformitarians, because what we have with the continents and the fact that they're moving vertically and horizontally, and the fact that you have this harmonic tide because of the water covering the entire face of the earth, then you have animals that are running up, leaving their footprints, they're being fossilized, and then they're fossilized in a different layer. I mean, is this the best that Bill has?
So we're going to answer anything at all.
So we got to go to our very last question, guys. I know you guys are passionate. We got to go to the next question, though. So Andrew Cumming, this is our very last one. We're going to cut her off. I'm going to let SFT end her, and then we'll start the after show. So here it is for SFT, Andrew Cumming. What is the basis for phylogenetic methodology? What are its assumptions?
The assumptions of phylogenetic methodology. If you're looking to phylogenetics, well, for one, they assume that every single DNA difference is the result of mutations. If they're building a phylogenetic tree based on pseudogenes, for example, they're assuming that every single pseudogene is the result of a genetic mistake. They're assuming that all life forms share ancestry, essentially. If they're building phylogenetic trees on, say, humans, well, based on the outgroup, based on the root, they're still going to assume that humans and chimpanzees share relationship further down the line. There's a ton of assumptions, but it depends what phylogenetic tree you're building and what genetic marker you're looking at. That's why when they look to these various genetic markers that they assume are the result of pseudogenes, and they're assuming we're inherited from past common ancestors and mutations, that is an erroneous assumption, because we know that pseudogenes reflect functional DNA elements that are essential to the life processes in the cell. So, I mean, there's a number of assumptions, and a lot of them are false assumptions.
Go ahead, Bill, if you want to respond to that.
Yeah, so phylogenies are based on comparing certain traits. It can be the genome. That's what modern phylogenies are often based on. However, we can't sequence dinosaur DNA. If they were buried in the flood, we'd be able to, by the way, but we can't because we don't have any dinosaur genetics. So we have to look at fossils and do things like comparative anatomy to group those in a phylogeny. But it can be based on comparative genomics as well. And you can also do it with technology as well. Something Standing for Truth never acknowledged is that he says we can get an idea for how God created by looking at how we create. We create through evolution, which forms phylogenies. So the fact that we find that in biology is very strong confirmation that God and evolution go hand in hand. Evolution is creation over time. It forms a fractal structure as it grows. That's just how it works.
All right, go ahead, SFT. It was addressed to you, so we'll let you finish out.
Well, I'll say this, is we actually do have bits and pieces of dinosaur DNA. We have bits and pieces of, actually we have full DNA from Neanderthal. He's shaking his head because he's not up to date on the literature, just like he's not real DNA. Any of the questions pertaining to Y chromosome. So he needs to update himself. We do have that DNA, which could not exist if Neanderthals, for example, if dinosaurs, especially when it comes to the soft dinosaur tissue, if these organisms were buried millions and millions of years ago. So when it actually comes to the question, instead of going off topic as Bill has been doing all day, we've got paper after paper here. The key assumption made when constructing a phylogenetic tree from a set of sequences is that they are all derived from a single ancestral sequence. They are homologous. Okay. Right. Because tree analysis tools are used so widely, they tend to introduce a bias into the interpretation of results. Remember, every argument I use today is based on sound literature, okay, is based on technical literature that are not always from young earth creationist sources, although young earth creationist sources are great too, and they refute Bill's position, but he can't refute the secular literature. So there is assumptions built in that they admit to, and they admit to these massive problems of mosaic evolution, convergent evolution, as you can see here. Here we go. The first and primary assumption of all evolutionary phylogenetic classification methodologies is that common ancestry is true. Assume evolution to prove evolution. I'll end there.
There we go, guys. So that's all the questions and super chats we have. It was a good one, a passionate debate, and I respect that. A little bit over talking here and there, but that's okay. That's just part of debating. But I mean, I'm going to let you, SFT, close her out. I do know that there's a after show on Illogical Plausible Probables channel. I recommend people go over there. It's going to be fun. And yeah, I'm going to let you close it out, SFT. Go ahead.
Okay, well, guys, it's been an awesome chat. We've had over 75 people. I want to thank everybody for the super stickers and the super chats. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this debate. I want to say thank you to Bill for actually agreeing to the debate, because we get a lot of comment warriors, a lot of keyboard warriors, and at least Bill stepped up. He was willing to defend his position here in a live debate, and maybe more of the keyboard warriors in the comment section should be willing to do so. So this was a great debate. Thanks to the audience. And Bill, thank you so much. I know it got a little heated, passionate at times, but that is typically the case with these important topics. And Bill, I'll give you some final words to end it here.
Yeah, it's my first ever debate. It went about as good as I could expect. Yeah, I don't really have anything to say in conclusion. There we go.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Everybody's had fun. I mean, we got 80 people in the chat still at 2.5 hours. So we can keep this going for another 2.5 hours, except I'm exhausted. So everybody head on over to Brother John Maddox's channel for an after show, which I am sure is, as always, going to be one to remember. His last after show just 2 days ago with Ken Hovind versus Atheist Jr. was a lot of fun. So everybody, God bless. Praise I am. Thanks for being a mod. Praise, you did a great job moderating. I got to say,
that.
I know it wasn't easy tonight, but you did a great job and helped create a debate to remember. So everybody, God bless. SFT is out.